Close your eyes for a second. Picture the top of Mount Olympus. Not the tourist mountain you can hike with a backpack and a camera. I mean the Olympus the ancient Greeks felt was real. A peak so high it cuts into clouds that never seem to leave. Snow shining, wind screaming, the air thin enough to make you dizzy. And above those clouds, in a space no mortal is supposed to see, there's a palace. White marble that doesn't age, gold that doesn't dull, columns like frozen sunlight, a roof that feels like it's touching the sky itself. And in the center, on a throne that looks forged out of authority, sits Zeus. Deep blue robes, a presence that makes even other gods hesitate. Eyes that don't just look at you, they weigh you. A voice that doesn't need to shout, because the thunder does it for him. In one hand, the aegis, an object so charged with fear and power that later storytellers would attach the face of Medusa to it. At his side, the thunderbolt, crafted by Cyclopes, a weapon that doesn't just kill, it ends arguments. Above him, eagles circle like living symbols. And below him, every oath, every storm, every king with a crown exists under his shadow. Now here's the part most people miss. Zeus isn't famous because he's cool mythology. Zeus is famous because for more than 1,000 years, he was religion. Not entertainment, not bedtime stories. A living force people feared, loved, bargained with, and depended on. Farmers prayed to him when the sky went silent and the crops began to crack. Sailors begged him when the horizon turned black. Cities swore treaties in his name because they believed perjury didn't just ruin reputations, it invited lightning. Temples to Zeus dotted the Mediterranean world. Festivals honored him with games, sacrifices, vows, and songs. And when thunder rolled, people didn't say, "Interesting weather." They said, "He's listening." So tonight, we're not just retelling myths. We're following a trail of power, how Zeus became Zeus. Because he didn't drop into Greek history fully formed like a movie character. He evolved. He absorbed older traditions. He changed shape depending on the city that worshipped him. He gained new titles, new roles, new contradictions. The Zeus of Athens isn't exactly the Zeus of Olympia. The Zeus in Homer doesn't sound like the Zeus in later philosophy. And the Zeus the Romans called Jupiter. He's both the same god and a political reinvention. To understand the king of the gods, we have to go further back than Greece, back before the Parthenon, back before Homer, back before anyone wrote the name Zeus at all. Because the roots of Zeus reach into a prehistoric world where people didn't have books. They had sky. They had the bright day overhead. They had storms that could level forests. They had lightning that struck without warning, divine fire from nowhere. And they had a simple, terrifying idea. Someone up there is stronger than us. And he sees everything. Scholars call those early ancestors the Indo-Europeans, a family of peoples who spread across huge distances thousands of years ago, carrying languages and carrying gods. And among those gods was a figure we can almost reconstruct by the fingerprints he left behind. A Skyfather, a deity of the bright heavens, a watcher, a judge, a giver of rain, a breaker of oaths. His name shifts across cultures like a melody in different instruments. In Rome, it becomes Jupiter. In parts of India, you see echoes in ancient divine names. In Greece, it becomes Zeus, short, sharp, like a lightning crack. And when Greek-speaking peoples arrived in the land that would become Greece, they didn't arrive to an empty stage. There were already sacred caves, old shrines, local spirits, earth gods, mountain powers. So Zeus didn't just inherit the sky. He took it. He blended. He absorbed. He became the roof that covered every other god. And that's where the real story begins. Not on Olympus, yet, but in the deep past, when humans looked up at the bright day sky and decided it wasn't just weather, it was a father. If Zeus feels inevitable, like the sky always belonged to him, that's only because we're hearing the story at the end of a long transformation. To find the real beginning, we have to travel to a time before Greece was Greece, before city-states, before marble temples, before epics were sung by poets with names we remember. We have to go back to a prehistoric world where people didn't write history. They lived it, moving across open plains and mountain corridors, carrying their language like a seed. Scholars call them the Indo-Europeans. Their original homeland is still debated, but the broad picture is clear. Over thousands of years, roughly between the 4th and 2nd millennium BCE, different Indo-European speaking groups spread across vast distances. And wherever they went, they didn't just bring words. They brought a way of seeing the universe. At the center of that universe was a figure so old, so foundational, that his fingerprints show up in multiple cultures that never spoke to each other again. A Skyfather, not a gentle sky spirit. A father, authority, law, witness, judgment, attached to the bright day sky and the storms that tore across it. Even the language remembers him. Across Indo-European traditions, you see divine names that sound strangely related. A shining sky. Plus this, a father title. Linguists reconstruct a proto-form that roughly means something like Skyfather, built from roots tied to brightness, daylight, and paternal authority. And this isn't just wordplay. It's theology. Ancient, primal theology. Because when you live close to nature, the sky isn't background scenery. It's an unpredictable god. Rain can save a harvest, or fail, and turn your year into hunger. Thunder can sound like a warning. Lightning can kill without mercy. And most importantly, the sky is always above you. That means it's the perfect witness. If you swear an oath in the open air, what's the one thing that can't look away? The sky. So in many Indo-European traditions, the Skyfather becomes linked to justice and oath-keeping, not because someone wrote a moral code, but because societies needed a cosmic enforcer, something larger than any tribe chief or king. Now here's the key twist. When Greek-speaking peoples entered the land we call Greece, they didn't arrive as blank slates. They came with this Skyfather already in their bones. But Greece wasn't empty. There were older peoples there, communities with their own sacred caves, mountain shrines, earth powers, and local gods whose names we don't even fully know anymore. What happens when a migrating religion collides with an older religious landscape? It doesn't just replace it, it blends. That process has a name, syncretism, and it's one of the secret engines behind Zeus's rise. Instead of destroying older sacred sites, incoming Greeks often adopted them. A holy cave already believed to hold divine power didn't need to be erased. It could be rebranded. A local storm god, a mountain god, a protector spirit. Over time, their functions could be folded into the identity of the Skyfather the Greeks brought with them. Zeus becomes a sponge for the divine. That's why he ends up with so many titles, so many versions of himself tied to specific places, specific mountains, specific customs. In one region, he's a weather lord. In another, he's tied to ancient rites that feel almost pre-Greek. In another, he's a guardian of social order. It's not chaos, it's evolution. And then we hit something incredibly important, because it's not myth. It's evidence. Bronze Age Greece, what we call the Mycenaean period, left behind clay tablets written in an early Greek script called Linear B. These tablets aren't epic poetry. They're not myths. They're administrative records, lists, offerings, inventories. And inside those dry, practical records, Zeus shows up, not as a dramatic thunder king on Olympus, but as a name receiving offerings, existing as a recognized divine power. That's a huge deal, because it means Zeus worship isn't a later invention of Homer or Hesiod. It's not something that appears only when Greece becomes literate again. It's older. It goes back at least into the late Bronze Age, more than 3,000 years ago. But there's another twist. Those same tablets suggest a complex religious world where multiple gods were important, and in some places, other deities may have held higher status than Zeus at the time. So Zeus didn't start as the obvious king. He had to become that. And the pathway from Bronze Age deity to cosmic monarch runs straight through collapse. Through the fall of palaces, the loss of writing, the fragmentation of Greece into smaller communities. A dark age where religion didn't die. It changed shape in the shadows. And when literacy returns, when poets like Homer and Hesiod finally give Greece its grand mythic narrative, Zeus emerges not as one god among many, but as the one sitting at the top. And that raises the next question. If Zeus wasn't always king, how did he seize the throne of the universe? That's where the myth begins to speak in the language of power. Prophecy, fear, a child hidden in a cave, and a father who eats his own children to stop fate. Every empire has a founding secret. And for Zeus, the secret is this. He wasn't born into a stable world. He was born into a family that treated love like a weakness, and prophecy like a death sentence. Because in the mythic history of the universe, power doesn't change hands peacefully. It's taken, and it starts with a fear older than kings. The fear that your child will replace you. Before Zeus is king of the gods, the cosmos belongs to the Titans, ancient forces who feel less like people and more like the raw architecture of reality. At the center of that Titan world is Kronos. Kronos isn't just a father. He's a ruler who remembers exactly how rulers fall, because he did it himself. He overthrew his own father, Uranus, the sky, after Uranus tried to suppress the next generation. So Kronos knows the pattern. A son rises, a father falls. And then Kronos hears the prophecy. One of his children will overthrow him. If you've ever noticed how Greek myths obsess over destiny, this is one of the reasons. These stories are built on a universe that feels like it has a hidden script. And Kronos, like every tyrant who thinks he can outsmart that script, decides to cheat the ending. His solution is horrifyingly simple. He eats his children. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Each time Rhea, his wife, his sister, the mother of his children, gives birth, Kronos takes the newborn and swallows it whole. The child disappears into him like it never existed. One after another, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, 5 births, 5 disappearances. Rhea's grief isn't quiet sorrow, it's rage. Because there's something uniquely cruel about being a mother in a world where the father can erase your children with a single act. Rhea is watching her family get consumed, watching the future get swallowed. So when she becomes pregnant again, she chooses rebellion. And here's what matters. Zeus's first victory isn't a thunderbolt. It isn't a battle. It's a lie, crafted with precision. Rhea conspires with Gaia, the earth, the ancient mother force beneath everything. And they build a deception so clean it changes the universe. When Zeus is born, Rhea hides him. The myth places this hiding on Crete, an island that will later become sacred ground, a place where caves and mountains don't just feel ancient, they feel pre-human. Different traditions argue about the exact cave, Dictaean or Idaean, but that argument itself tells you something important. Multiple real locations wanted to claim Zeus's origin, because whoever owns the birthplace of the king owns a piece of his authority. To fool Kronos, Rhea wraps a stone in swaddling cloth, an imitation baby, and hands it to her husband, and Kronos swallows it. He doesn't even check. That detail always lands like dark humor, but it's also symbolic. Tyranny is so confident in its own brutality that it stops being careful. It becomes lazy. It assumes obedience. And that assumption is what saves Zeus. Now the story shifts into something almost folkloric. The divine child hidden in a cave, raised in secret, protected by strange guardians. Because a baby, even a god baby, cries. And crying is a signal. So the myth gives Zeus protectors. The Curettes, armored dancers, warrior figures who clash shields and weapons to drown out the child's voice. Noise as camouflage, ritual as protection. And then there are the nurses. Sometimes it's a goat, Amalthea, whose milk sustains him, turning a humble animal into something cosmic. Later, the myth says her hide becomes the Aegis, Zeus's shield, and she's placed among the stars. Sometimes it's nymphs, sometimes bees, sometimes honey. The details shift from region to region, which is exactly what you'd expect if this myth grew out of multiple older traditions. Crete had ancient sacred caves long before Greek speakers arrived. The myth may be absorbing older rituals and sanctuaries into the Zeus story, giving the new supreme god a home in the old holy places. And that's the real power of this childhood tale. It's not just a cute origin story. It does 3 things at once. First, it explains how Zeus survives Kronos. Second, it makes Crete sacred, a political and religious claim stamped into geography. And third, it establishes the theme that will define Zeus forever. He wins through force, yes. But first, he wins through intelligence. Zeus is raised in the dark, in secrecy, in tension, and when he finally emerges, he isn't just strong. He's ready. Ready to free the siblings trapped inside Kronos. Ready to gather allies. Ready to turn a family nightmare into a cosmic revolution. Because the hidden child isn't just trying to survive. He's about to start the war that remakes the universe. Zeus grows up the way revolutions grow up, quietly, in hiding, fueled by something that never cools down. A promise. The promise that Kronos won't get to rewrite the future. But if Zeus wants the throne, he can't just storm Olympus and call himself king. Not yet. There's a first problem, maybe the cruelest one. His siblings are still alive, inside their father. And Zeus needs them, because Kronos isn't a lone tyrant. He's the head of an entire older order, the Titans, ancient powers who ruled before the world had laws written in the language of gods. So Zeus doesn't start with lightning. He starts with strategy. Most traditions say Zeus seeks help from Metis. Her name means something like cunning intelligence. She's a titaness of craft and sharp thinking, the kind of figure myths use to explain how brains beat brute force. Metis prepares a potion, an emetic, a divine purge. And then comes one of the most unforgettable scenes in all mythology, not because it's glamorous, but because it's primal. Zeus gets Kronos to drink it, and Kronos begins to vomit. First comes the stone, still wrapped like a baby, the lie that saved Zeus. That stone doesn't vanish into the past. In some traditions, it becomes a sacred relic, placed at Delphi as a kind of cosmic marker, a reminder that the center of the world is built on deception and survival. Then, the real horror reverses itself. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, Hestia. They come out in reverse order, fully grown, alive, angry, and suddenly free. Imagine the emotional shock of that moment. They weren't just rescued, they were returned to existence. And in mythic logic, that creates a bond stronger than blood. The bond of liberation. They look at Zeus, the youngest, and they follow him. Not because he's the oldest, not because tradition says he should lead, because he did what none of them could do. He outsmarted the king. But even with 5 powerful gods at his side, Zeus still doesn't have enough. The Titans aren't just strong. They're ancient. They're established. They're the old rulebook. So Zeus goes to the place where the old rulebook hides its mistakes. Tartarus. Deep beneath the world. So far below that even the gods speak about it like a distance that can't be measured in steps. It's less a location than a concept, the basement of reality. And locked inside Tartarus are the beings Kronos and Uranus both feared, the Cyclopes, and the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants. These aren't monsters in the childish sense. They're the raw machinery of war, living siege weapons. Zeus breaks their chains, and in that act, he does something that matters more than a battle. He creates loyalty, because the ones who were wronged don't just become allies. They become devoted. The Cyclopes pay Zeus back the only way they know how. They forge. And what they forge isn't decoration. It's destiny. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, lightning shaped into a weapon. For Poseidon, the trident, power over seas and the trembling earth. For Hades, the helm of invisibility, control over what cannot be seen. These gifts don't just arm the brothers. They define the domains the cosmos will later be divided into. Weapons first, order second. Then the Hecatoncheires step forward, 100 hands, overwhelming force. In some versions, they become the artillery that turns the tide. One giant throwing 1 rock is impressive. A giant throwing 100 at once? That's the sky itself becoming a battlefield. Now Zeus is ready to do what every new order must do. Declare war on the old one. This war has a name. The Titanomachy. The War of the Titans. And it isn't a quick fight. It's not a single heroic duel. It lasts 10 years. 10 years of divine violence so intense the myths describe it like the universe almost can't survive the strain. The Titans fight from their mountain stronghold. The Olympians, Zeus's faction, fight from Olympus. Between them, the world becomes a war zone. Thunderbolts rip the sky open. Mountains are shattered. Seas boil in the imagination. The earth cracks beneath the impact of gods colliding. And here's the key point. The myth isn't only telling you Zeus is strong. It's telling you Zeus is legitimate, because Kronos didn't become ruler through justice. He became ruler through betrayal, castrating his father, seizing power, then eating his children. Zeus, in contrast, frames himself as the liberator. He frees his siblings. He frees the imprisoned. He brings allies into a coalition. He builds a new order out of the resentment of the old order's victims. And that's why, in the story, when the Olympians finally win, it doesn't feel like a random victory. It feels like history turning. But the war isn't finished yet. Because even when the Titans fall, the universe still has one last question to answer. How do you keep power once you've taken it? 10 years. That's how long the universe stays in a state of open war. A decade of divine violence so total it's described like creation itself is being rewritten in fire. And then, finally, the balance breaks. The Olympians, Zeus and his coalition of siblings, freed prisoners and forged weapons, pushed the Titans past the point of recovery. This is where the myth becomes brutally political, because victory doesn't just mean you win. Victory means you decide what happens to everyone who lost. And Zeus doesn't merely defeat the Titans. He erases their ability to return. The defeated Titans are cast into Tartarus, down into the deepest underworld, a place the Greeks imagined as farther beneath the earth than the earth is beneath the sky. Not just prison, a cosmic dead end. And to make sure the prison holds, Zeus doesn't trust locks, he trusts force. The Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed giants he freed, become the guards. The same beings Kronos once feared now stand watch over Kronos' fallen regime. It's not subtle. It's a message. The new order is built on the strength of those the old order tried to bury. Now, Kronos himself, the old king, gets an ending that depends on which tradition you listen to. In some versions, he stays in Tartarus with the others, forever defeated. In others, he's eventually released and sent to rule a distant paradise, the Isles of the Blessed, where heroes go after death. That contradiction is important. It shows you something most people forget about Greek myth. It isn't one fixed canon. It's a living web of regional traditions, reshaped by poets, cities, and centuries. But whichever version you choose, the point remains. Kronos is no longer in charge. The throne is empty, and the universe needs a new map. So Zeus and his brothers do what conquering powers always do. They divide territory. They cast lots, or negotiate, depending on the telling. But the result becomes one of the most famous cosmic partitions in Western mythology. Zeus takes the sky. Not as aesthetic background, but as the supreme domain, the roof over everything. The place thunder comes from. The place rain is born. The place oaths are witnessed. Poseidon takes the sea. All waters, all storms rolling in from the horizon, all the hidden power under a calm surface. Hades takes the underworld. Not hell in the Christian sense, more like the administrative kingdom of the dead. The invisible city beneath life, where every mortal eventually becomes a citizen. And the earth? The earth is shared, which is an elegant way of saying nobody truly owns it, but everyone fights on it. Now we see the first stable structure of the cosmos. 3 brothers, 3 realms, 1 hierarchy. Because even though each brother rules his domain, Zeus is above them. His sky covers Poseidon's sea. His sky covers the entrances to Hades. His sky is literally and symbolically the highest authority. And his sisters, freed from Kronos' stomach, restored to existence, take their own roles in the new reality. Hestia becomes the hearth, home fire, city fire, the center of family and civic life. Demeter becomes the harvest, grain, fertility, the survival of communities. Hera becomes the queen, marriage, women, legitimacy, the social structure that keeps households and kingdoms from collapsing. The Olympian order isn't just a family drama. It's a blueprint for Greek society. Home, agriculture, marriage, war, justice, death. All of it becomes divine. All of it becomes organized. And for the first time, the universe has a king who doesn't merely rule by fear. Zeus rules by structure. That's what the Titanomachy ultimately explains. Why the world isn't ruled by raw chaos. Why the sky isn't just weather. Why kings can claim legitimacy. Why oaths matter. Why betrayal has cosmic consequences. But this is the point where mythology does something clever. It refuses to let you believe power is ever truly settled. Because even after Kronos falls, the story doesn't give Zeus a peaceful coronation and credits roll. It gives him a warning. A new order always creates new enemies. Gaia, the earth, doesn't look at the defeated Titans and say, "Fair enough." She looks at her children locked in Tartarus and feels something primal: grief, rage. And if the Titans were one kind of threat, the old regime, then Gaia is about to produce another kind. A rebellion designed specifically to break Zeus's rule. Because the next wars aren't about succession, they're about survival. Zeus has proven he can take the throne. Now he has to prove he can hold it. And that means facing enemies that aren't just rivals. They're nightmares made flesh. Giants who can't be killed by gods alone. And a monster so terrifying that, in some versions, the gods themselves panic and run. The cosmic crown has been placed on Zeus's head, but the universe isn't done testing him. Zeus wins the throne. And immediately, the universe asks him a cruel question. What happens when the earth itself refuses to accept your victory? Because Gaia isn't just a goddess in these stories. She's the ground beneath everything. The ancient mother force that existed before Zeus, before Kronos, before the idea of an Olympian government even had a name. And Gaia has just watched her Titan children get thrown into Tartarus like criminals. To Zeus, it's justice. To Gaia, it's humiliation. So she does what myths always have the earth do when it's angry. She creates something new. A counterforce. A rebellion engineered for one purpose: to break Olympus. The giants. Not the goofy fairy tale kind. These are the Gigantes. Massive, violent beings, sometimes described with serpent legs, sometimes with bodies like living mountains. Their origin is as brutal as their function. In many versions, they rise from the blood of Uranus when he is attacked, and the sky bleeds onto the earth. They're born out of old violence, and now they bring new violence. But Gaia is smart. She doesn't just create stronger enemies. She creates enemies with a built-in advantage. A prophecy hangs over the war. The giants cannot be killed by gods alone. Let that land for a second. It means Zeus, king of gods, thunderbolt in hand, has a limit. Not a limit in strength, a limit in rules. The universe has conditions even the ruler must obey. And Zeus can't brute force his way out of a cosmic law. So the Gigantomachy, the war against the giants, becomes something different from the Titanomachy. The Titan War was a succession crisis. Old rulers versus new rulers. This one is existential. This is the earth trying to overthrow the sky. The giants stack mountains like siege towers, trying to climb their way to Olympus. Pelion on Ossa, Ossa on Olympus. An image so iconic it becomes shorthand for rebellion itself. It's basically the myth saying, they tried to build a staircase to the throne. Zeus rallies the Olympians. And it's not just Zeus and a couple of allies. Nearly every major god gets pulled into this fight. Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Dionysus, Hecate, Poseidon. The whole order defending itself. But Zeus still needs one thing he doesn't like needing: a mortal. So he calls the greatest hero available, Heracles, Zeus's own son, which is, in a way, deeply poetic. The king of gods must rely on his half-human bloodline to save the divine order. The wars fought at a place called Phlegra, the burning place, often imagined as volcanic ground, a landscape that feels like the earth is already angry. And the battle unfolds like a series of brutal personal duels. Each giant has to be defeated twice. First wounded by a god, then finished by Heracles, usually with arrows, often poisoned. It's repetitive by design. The myth wants you to feel the grind of war. This isn't one decisive thunderbolt. This is a campaign. One giant, again and again, tries to cheat death by staying on his native soil. So Heracles drags him away from his homeland to finally end him. Another giant lunges for Hera. Zeus strikes him, and Heracles seals the kill. Another is blinded, shot through both eyes. Another is crushed under an island. And that detail matters, because Greek myth loves to explain geography through violence. A mountain isn't just a mountain, it's a tomb. An island isn't just land, it's a lid. The world itself becomes the prison system of the defeated. A giant pinned beneath the volcano explains the eruption, his breath, his rage, his struggle under the weight. It's mythology doing science before science existed, giving visible phenomena a narrative cause. When the last giant falls, the prophecy is fulfilled. The gods win. But notice what the story just admitted. The Olympians were not invincible on their own. They needed human participation, which is both humbling and terrifying. Humbling, because it means the divine order isn't self-sustaining. Terrifying, because it implies the gods and mortals are tied together in a chain of necessity. The gods shape humans. But sometimes, humans decide whether the gods survive. And Zeus learned something crucial here. Power isn't only about strength. It's about alliances, about rules, about knowing when even a king needs help. But if you think the Gigantomachy is the ultimate test, the myth disagrees. Because after the giants fail, the universe doesn't calm down. It escalates. Gaia, still furious, produces something worse than an army, a single enemy. A creature so enormous and so terrifying that, in some versions, the gods do something unthinkable. They run. And Zeus, who cannot run because he is the crown itself, will have to face that monster alone. Its name is Typhon. And the next story isn't a war. It's a nightmare. The giants failed. The mountains they tried to stack into a staircase to Olympus became monuments to their defeat. And for a moment, you can almost imagine silence returning to the cosmos. Almost. But Gaia, the earth, doesn't accept almost. Because to Gaia, Zeus isn't just a new king. He's an occupier. He locked her children in Tartarus. He crowned himself above her. He turned the sky into a throne. So Gaia makes one more attempt. Not with an army this time, but with a single weapon. A creature designed to be the last word in terror. Typhon. Sometimes called Typheus. Different names, same nightmare. And the descriptions are so exaggerated they stop sounding like a character and start sounding like a natural disaster given a body. Typhon is gigantic. So huge his head brushes the stars. His arms stretch from sunrise to sunset. His eyes burn. His voice is a storm siren mixed with animal screams. And where his hands should end in fingers, some traditions give him dragon heads. 100 of them. Hissing, snapping, spitting venom and fire. Below the waist, he becomes coils, serpents stacked on serpents. Like the earth itself trying to imitate the shape of chaos. Typhon isn't just strong. He's anti-order, a living rejection of everything Zeus claims to represent. And when Typhon rises, the myth makes a startling choice. In some versions, the gods panic. Not mortals, the gods. They scatter, fleeing across the world, hiding in foreign lands, even disguising themselves as animals to escape the monster's attention. Ancient storytellers sometimes use this to explain why Egyptian gods have animal forms, because supposedly those were Greek gods in hiding. Whether you take that literally or symbolically, the message is the same. Typhon is so terrifying that even immortals feel fear. But Zeus doesn't have that option. A king can't abandon the throne, not when the throne is the concept of order itself. So Zeus stands, and what follows is not diplomacy, not negotiation, not a clever trick. It's raw, cosmic combat. Thunderbolts tear through the sky like artillery. Typhon throws mountains back like stones. Fire meets lightning. Wind becomes a weapon. The sea is said to boil from the heat of their collision. Even the underworld trembles. Some myths say Hades, down in the realm of the dead, fears the earth will crack and expose his kingdom if the battle gets any more violent. That's how large this fight is. It's not happening on the world. It's happening to the world. And then comes one of the strangest twists in Zeus's story, because myths love to remind you that even the strongest being can be brought low. In one tradition, Typhon actually gains the upper hand. He doesn't just injure Zeus, he disables him. Typhon cuts the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, rendering the Thunder King helpless, unable to stand, unable to grasp his own power. Zeus is carried off like a captured god and hidden away in a cave, guarded like a trophy. That moment is shocking because it's taboo. The idea that Zeus can be reduced to vulnerability. But the myth uses it for a purpose. It creates tension. It proves this isn't easy supremacy. And it sets up the rebound, because Zeus is not saved by brute force. He's saved by intervention, by cleverness and speed. Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the one who moves between worlds. And sometimes Pan, wild god of sudden fear, whose name later becomes the root of panic. Together, they sneak, steal back Zeus's sinews, restore them, and return the king to his body like a weapon being reassembled. And when Zeus returns, he doesn't return cautious. He returns furious. The thunderbolts become relentless, strike after strike after strike, pushing Typhon across the landscape like a storm chasing another storm. The fight sweeps over mountains, coastlines, open plains, as if the entire Mediterranean is being used as a battleground. In some versions, Typhon is even tricked, deceived into eating fruits that weaken him, like fate itself taking sides. And then, it ends the way Greek myth loves to end unstoppable threats, with containment. Zeus doesn't simply kill Typhon, he buries him. Mount Etna, one of the most famous volcanoes in the ancient world, becomes the lid of Typhon's prison. The eruptions, the smoke, the lava, are explained as Typhon still breathing, still raging, still struggling beneath the mountain. That's the brilliance of the story. It turns geology into biography. Every earthquake becomes Typhon shifting. Every eruption becomes Typhon's anger leaking through stone. And Zeus? Zeus is the force that keeps the lid shut. So by the end of these three cosmic crises, the Titanomachy, the Gigantomachy, and Typhon, Zeus has proven something that's bigger than victory. He has proven permanence. He didn't just take power from the old order, he defended it from rebellion. And he personally contained the worst monster the universe could produce. Now Olympus can finally stop fighting wars for survival and start doing what rulers do when the crown is secure: govern. And the first way Zeus governs, before politics, before marriages, before laws, is through something every Greek could see and feel every day: the sky, thunder, rain, the weather that decides whether you eat or starve. When Zeus becomes king, he doesn't rule the way humans rule. He doesn't need a palace guard. He doesn't need walls. His kingdom is the one thing you can't escape: the sky. And that's why Zeus isn't just a mythological celebrity. He's an everyday experience. Because in ancient Greece, weather wasn't small talk. Weather was life. If the rains came at the wrong time, grain rotted. If they didn't come at all, fields cracked open like broken pottery. If storms hit the coast, ships vanished. If lightning struck a house, people didn't call it bad luck. They called it a verdict. Zeus's most famous symbol, the thunderbolt, wasn't only a weapon for epic battles. It was a declaration of authority. In art, Zeus is almost always shown holding it, about to throw it, or having just thrown it, like the universe is constantly one heartbeat away from punishment. And to the Greeks, that wasn't metaphor. Thunder was Zeus's voice, or the sound of his chariot wheels rolling across the heavens. When thunder rumbled during a major event, an oath, a political decision, a public ceremony, people could read it as approval, warning, or anger. The sky became a kind of theater. And Zeus was the unseen audience. Lightning was even more terrifying because it felt personal. A storm is general. Lightning is specific. It chooses a tree, a temple roof, a ship mast, a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. So when lightning struck, Greeks often treated the strike zone as sacred. It could be marked, fenced, even turned into a shrine. Because the logic was simple. If Zeus touched the earth here, this ground is no longer ordinary. It's been claimed. That's why Zeus carries epithets, special titles, like a ruler with many job descriptions. Zeus, the Thunderer. Zeus who hurls lightning. Zeus, the Rainbringer. These aren't poetic decorations. They're functional names, ways of calling on the exact version of Zeus you need. Because Zeus wasn't worshipped as one single personality everywhere. He was worshipped as the power behind different needs. And nothing was more basic than rain. Modern people can talk about precipitation and pressure systems. Ancient farmers talked about prayer. Rain meant bread. Rain meant olives. Rain meant wine. Rain meant survival. So Zeus as rain god becomes essential, even in places where other gods were beloved. You could celebrate Athena for wisdom, Apollo for prophecy, Artemis for the hunt. But if the sky stayed empty, none of that mattered. A starving city doesn't care about philosophy. It cares about water. And rain wasn't seen as random. It was moral. Drought wasn't just unfortunate. Drought could be Zeus withholding. A punishment for wrongdoing. A response to hubris. A sign that the community had violated some sacred boundary. That belief gave religious life a sharp edge, because it meant ethics wasn't private. A city's behavior could anger Zeus, and the whole city would suffer. It's also why priests and oracles held real social power. If they claimed to interpret Zeus's will, why rain didn't come, what sacrifice might fix it, they became essential intermediaries between human survival and divine mood. Even Zeus's oldest inheritance shows up here. The Indo-European Skyfather wasn't only a storm god, he was a father married to the earth. And Greek religion preserves that image through an agricultural lens, the sky fertilizing the earth with rain. It sounds crude to modern ears, but it's actually a very old way of expressing something simple. Life comes from above and below working together. Sky, earth, water, growth. And Zeus sits on top of that cycle like the hand on a faucet. Now imagine living inside that world view. Every time clouds gather, you feel hope and fear. Hope because rain might save your crops. Fear because the same storm might drown them. Every flash of lightning is a reminder. Zeus can touch you anytime. That's why Zeus feels omnipresent in a way other gods don't. You can avoid a particular shrine. You can leave a city, but you can't leave the sky. Even indoors, thunder leaks through walls. Even at night, lightning turns the world white for a fraction of a second, like the gods just opened their eyes. And when an eagle appears, high above, circling, patient, it isn't just a bird. It's a sign. The sacred animal of Zeus because it flies higher than anything else, closer to the realm where he's believed to sit. An eagle at the right moment could be read as an omen. A yes. A no. A warning. Zeus doesn't need to descend like a character walking into the scene. He's already there. In the air pressure before a storm. In the rumble that makes your chest vibrate. In the rain that either blesses or ruins your year. So when we talk about Zeus ruling, it isn't abstract. It's physical. It's felt. And that constant presence is what makes the next part of his story so explosive. Because Zeus isn't just weather and justice. He's also a king with a household. A marriage that is supposed to represent order, yet becomes the loudest, messiest battlefield on Olympus. If Zeus rules the sky, then his marriages explain how he rules. Because in Greek myth, a king isn't just defined by his weapons. He's defined by the alliances he makes, especially the ones he makes in bed. And Zeus's first great relationship isn't with Hera. It's with Metis. Metis isn't just a lover. She's a concept with a pulse, cunning intelligence, strategy, the kind of mind that wins wars without shouting. She's the one who helps Zeus defeat Kronos, the one who understands potions, timing, and the art of turning a tyrant's strength into his weakness. So, it makes sense that Zeus chooses her first. But then the universe speaks again, in the form of prophecy. Metis will bear 2 children, first, a daughter, and then a son destined to be stronger than Zeus. A son who will overthrow him. And suddenly, Zeus is staring into the same mirror that terrified Kronos. The same pattern. The same curse of succession. Only Zeus doesn't respond the way Kronos did. He doesn't start swallowing babies. He swallows the mother. In most versions, Zeus tricks Metis into transforming into something small, something harmless, like a fly or a drop of water. And then he takes her in, absorbing her whole, locking the future inside his own body. It's an act of control so absolute it's almost hard to process. Zeus doesn't just want power. He wants power with no successor. He wants to end the pattern. But prophecy doesn't disappear just because you try to cheat it. Metis is already pregnant, and the child that must be born keeps growing inside Zeus. Then comes the famous moment. Zeus develops a headache so violent it feels like the universe cracking inside his skull. The pain isn't just physical, it's narrative pressure. Something is coming, and even the king of gods can't stop it. So Zeus calls for help. In some tellings, it's Hephaestus, the divine smith. In others, Prometheus. An axe is raised. Zeus's head is split open, and out of the wound, out of the crown itself, springs Athena. Fully grown, fully armored. Screaming a battle cry like the first sound she ever makes is a declaration of war. Athena isn't born like other gods. She erupts, and that birth is loaded with meaning. Athena becomes wisdom, strategy, civilization, law. Everything Zeus wants to claim as order. And because she emerges from his head, she's not just his child. She's his mind made into a person. She's the daughter who doesn't threaten him with replacement. She strengthens him. After Metis comes another union that isn't just romance. It's politics at a cosmic level. Themis. Her name means divine law, the established order, the rules that make a world feel stable. If Metis is strategy, Themis is legitimacy. So when Zeus takes Themis as consort, the myth is telling you, his reign isn't supposed to be mere violence. It's supposed to be lawful. And the children of this union reflect that. The Horae, order, seasons, the smooth turning of time. The Moirai, the fates, who measure and cut the thread of life itself. It's almost like Zeus is building a government. Metis, intelligence, Themis, law, the children, structure. But then comes the marriage everyone remembers. Hera. Hera isn't just Zeus's wife. She's the goddess of marriage itself. Meaning their union is supposed to be the divine template for how husbands and wives should exist. King and queen. Sacred couple. The public face of Olympus. Their wedding is mythic spectacle. All the gods attending. Gifts, songs. A honeymoon that lasts generations in some traditions. So long it's basically a mythic way of saying, this marriage is foundational. And Hera gives Zeus legitimate children. Ares the brutal face of war. Hebe youth. Eileithyia childbirth. And sometimes Hephaestus, depending on which tradition you follow. So on paper, this should be perfect. The Sky King and the Marriage Queen. Order and stability. But Greek myth doesn't do perfect. Because Zeus cannot stop doing the one thing Hera, by her very nature, cannot tolerate. He cannot stop straying. And this is where Olympus becomes less like a palace and more like a battlefield without end. Hera's rage isn't just personal jealousy, it's cosmic humiliation. Every affair is a public crack in the institution she embodies. Zeus isn't merely cheating on a wife, he's violating marriage itself, while sitting on the throne that claims to uphold order. And that contradiction becomes one of the engines of Greek storytelling. Hera cannot truly punish Zeus. He's too powerful. So she punishes the people around him. The women, the children, the mortals who don't stand a chance. It's brutal, it's unfair, and it's endlessly repeatable. Which is why poets never ran out of material. Because once Zeus is king, the wars don't end. They just change shape. From monsters and titans to desire, deception, and the collateral damage of divine power. Once Zeus is established as king, you might expect his story to become stable, a ruler, a throne, a fixed order. But Zeus doesn't rule like a machine. He rules like a personality. And nothing exposes that more, nothing complicates his image more than his relationships with mortal women. Because these aren't just love stories, they're origin stories. They explain where heroes come from, why royal families claim divine blood, why entire regions say, "We matter, Zeus touched our line." But they also reveal something darker, the way divine power interacts with human vulnerability. In Greek myth, when Zeus desires someone, he rarely arrives as himself. His true form is too much, too bright, too terrifying, too lethal. So he comes in disguises. And those disguises aren't random. They're carefully chosen shapes of persuasion. Take Danae. Her father, King Acrisius, hears a prophecy that her son will kill him. So he tries to defeat fate the way Kronos tried to defeat fate, by locking up the future. Danae is sealed inside a bronze chamber. No men, no contact, no possibility of pregnancy. It's control disguised as protection. Then Zeus sees her, and he doesn't knock on a door. He becomes something that ignores doors. A shower of gold. Golden rain slipping through the roof, flowing into the chamber like a miracle. Or like a theft, depending on how you read it. And from that encounter comes Perseus, slayer of Medusa, rescuer of Andromeda, a hero whose greatness requires a divine father. And the prophecy still wins. Acrisius is killed anyway, accidentally, at games, because Greek myth loves the cruel irony that the more you struggle against fate, the tighter you tie the knot. Then there's Europa. Europa is on the beach, surrounded by friends, living a normal human moment. Zeus sees her and chooses a disguise that feels harmless. Beautiful, gentle, inviting. A white bull, not raging, not aggressive. Calm enough to pet, magnificent enough to trust. Europa climbs onto its back, and the bull runs, straight into the sea. This is one of the most famous abductions in mythology, even if the myth dresses it in romance. The bull swims to Crete, Zeus reveals himself, and Europa becomes the mother of kings. Minos, among them, anchoring Zeus's story to the island where he was hidden as a child. It's a myth that ties conquest, lineage, and geography into one scene. Then there's Leda. Zeus approaches as a swan, an image later artists will obsess over, sometimes beautifully, sometimes uncomfortably. The myth produces eggs, children, and tangled parentage. Helen of Troy, Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux. A family that becomes a fuse for the Trojan War. You can feel the pattern emerging. Zeus touches a mortal life, and history catches fire. But the most psychologically chilling stories are the ones where Zeus doesn't become an animal. He becomes a person you trust. Alcmene is married to Amphitryon. Her husband is away at war. Zeus wants a child who will become the greatest hero. So Zeus takes Amphitryon's exact form, perfect voice, perfect face, perfect body. Alcmene believes she's welcoming her husband. In some tellings, Zeus even stretches the night, 3 times longer, so the deception lasts. And from that night comes Heracles, the ultimate hero, the one who will later fight giants beside the gods, completing labors so impossible they feel like a second myth layered on top of the first. But the story also forces a modern listener to notice what ancient audiences rarely questioned. Consent can't exist when identity is stolen. The myth doesn't frame it as tragedy, but the implication is hard to ignore. Then we reach Semele, one of the most haunting. Semele is loved by Zeus, visited by him, pregnant with his child. Hera discovers it and does what Hera always does. She doesn't attack Zeus directly. She attacks the vulnerable. Hera disguises herself as a nurse, a trusted voice, and plants the idea like a seed of poison. If he really loves you, make him prove it. So, Semele asks Zeus to appear in his true divine form. Zeus promises to grant her any wish, and in Greek myth, an oath is iron. Zeus can't break it without breaking his own cosmic role as guardian of vows. So, he comes, and he kills her. Not intentionally, almost worse than that. He kills her by being what he is. Thunder, lightning, divine radiance, too much for a mortal body to endure. Semele burns. Zeus rescues the unborn child, sews him into his own thigh, and later gives birth to Dionysus, god of ecstasy and wine, making the child both mortal-born and twice-born, a strange bridge between worlds. These stories do several things at once. They give Greece its heroes. They give cities their royal lineages. They connect local traditions to the central Olympian narrative. But they also show Zeus as a force of desire unrestrained by human rules. In many myths, refusal isn't a choice mortals truly have. When a god wants you, the imbalance is absolute. Ancient cultures often frame bearing a god's child as an honor, even when the path to it is violent or deceptive. That doesn't make it simple. It makes it historically revealing. Because Zeus here isn't just a lover. He's the embodiment of power behaving like power. And the consequences don't end with the encounter. They ripple into jealous vengeance, into heroic destinies, into wars, into the founding of cities, into myths that become a civilization's shared memory. And if Hera is the storm inside Zeus's marriage, then these mortal affairs are the lightning strikes that keep setting the world on fire. If Zeus's romances are the sparks, then his children are the wildfire. Because Zeus doesn't just rule Olympus from a throne. He rules through a dynasty, an entire network of divine forces that touch every part of life. In Greek religion, gods aren't abstract ideas floating in the sky. They're functions, domains, pressures on reality. And Zeus's children are the way his authority spreads outward like roots into every corner of existence. Start with Athena. Athena isn't just one of Zeus's children. She's the one who feels closest to him. Not because she's the sweetest, because she's the most aligned. Born from Zeus's head, she embodies what he wants to be seen as: wisdom, strategy, civic order, rational power. She's the difference between brute violence and intelligent dominance. In myth, Athena often stands at Zeus's right hand, the advisor, the executor, the one who understands how to win without turning the world into rubble. And Athens, of all cities, choosing her as patron says something important. Zeus's authority isn't only thunder, it's civilization. Then come Apollo and Artemis, twins born to Leto, pursued by Hera's jealousy, forced to find refuge where no land will accept them. They're finally born on Delos, a floating island, which becomes sacred forever after. Apollo is music, prophecy, healing, archery, but also order, clarity, and punishment of hubris. If Athena is civic intelligence, Apollo is cosmic harmony. His oracle at Delphi becomes one of the most powerful institutions in the ancient world, shaping decisions of kings and city-states for centuries. But the oracle isn't just Apollo's mouth. It's an extension of Zeus's governance, a divine bureaucracy of fate and interpretation. Artemis is different. She is wilderness. She is the untouched margin. Hunt, moonlight, wild animals, the sharp boundary between civilization and what civilization cannot tame. And that contrast is crucial. Zeus's family contains both the forces that build order and the forces that remind humans they're never fully in control. Now Hermes. Hermes is born to the nymph Maia in a cave, and immediately acts like a god who doesn't obey normal timelines. On the day he's born, he's already inventing, stealing, negotiating. He becomes the messenger, the translator, the boundary crosser. Travelers, merchants, thieves, diplomats, shepherds, even the dead, Hermes guides souls downward. In other words, Hermes is what Zeus needs to actually run a cosmos. A king can sit on a throne all day, but messages still have to travel. Deals still have to be made. Realms still have to connect. Hermes is Zeus's nerve system. Then there's Dionysus. And Dionysus is a problem, not because he's weak, but because he represents the kind of human experience Zeus's order doesn't easily contain. Ecstasy, intoxication, possession, theater, the loss of control. Dionysus is the god who arrives like a wave, joyful, terrifying, liberating, destabilizing. Yet Dionysus eventually becomes an Olympian. And that fact matters, because it shows Zeus's rule isn't simply about crushing what threatens order. Sometimes it's about absorbing it, integrating the wild, the irrational, the ecstatic, so it doesn't destroy the system from outside. Ares is the opposite of Athena. Ares is war as bloodlust, chaos, violence, fury, the part of battle that has no strategy and no moral purpose, only impact. And what's fascinating is that Zeus, in some texts, doesn't even like Ares. He tolerates him because war exists, violence exists, and a ruler can't pretend those forces aren't real. Hephaestus, divine smith, maker of weapons and wonders, adds another dimension. He's craft, labor, the fire beneath the earth, the forge inside volcanoes. Whether he's Zeus's son or not depends on the tradition, but his role in the Olympian system is essential. He turns power into objects. He makes the thunderbolt. He builds palaces. He creates the technology of gods. Then there are Zeus's children that don't feel like characters, but like cosmic laws given faces. The Horae, seasons, order, the regular turning of time, and the Moirai, the fates. Clotho spins the thread of life. Lachesis measures it. Atropos cuts it. And this creates the most unsettling philosophical tension in Zeus's entire dynasty. If Zeus is king, why can't he overrule the fates? Some Greeks argued he could. Others argued he wouldn't. Others believed Zeus is fate, and the Moirai simply express his will. But the uncertainty itself tells you something important about how ancient people thought. Even in a world with gods, people sensed there were limits. Structures deeper than any personality, rules beneath the ruler. And finally, the Muses, daughters of Zeus and memory. That pairing alone is poetic, the king of gods. Plus, memory produces art, epic poetry, history, music, tragedy, comedy, dance, astronomy. The Muses don't just entertain. They shape how humans remember reality. They shape culture itself. So step back and look at the pattern. Zeus's children aren't random. They're a map: wisdom, prophecy, wilderness, communication, ecstasy, war, craft, time, fate, art. Through them, Zeus's authority extends into every major dimension of existence, which means when ancient Greeks prayed to Zeus, they weren't only praying to a thunder god. They were praying to the father network behind the entire divine order. A king with a family so vast, it becomes reality's operating system. And the next question becomes inevitable. If Zeus's power covers everything, then how does he keep it moral? How does he justify it? That's where Zeus's most ancient role returns, older than Olympus itself. Zeus as judge. Zeus as the watcher of oaths. Zeus as the hand that punishes hubris and defends the sacred rules that keep society from tearing itself apart. For all the thunder, all the wars, all the scandals, the most important thing Zeus represents in Greek religion might be something quieter. Rules. Not human laws written on stone. Cosmic rules. The kind that make life feel like it isn't pure chaos, because Zeus isn't only the strongest god. He's the god people look to when they ask, does anything matter? Will betrayal be punished? Is the universe watching? That's why some of Zeus's oldest titles don't describe lightning. They describe judgment. Zeus Horkios, Zeus of oaths. In a world without modern courts, contracts, or police systems, an oath is more than a promise. It's a social backbone. If oaths collapse, trust collapses. Trade collapses, alliances collapse, cities collapse. So the Greeks placed the oath under Zeus's authority. To swear by Zeus is to say, the sky itself is my witness. And that makes perjury a religious crime, not merely a moral failing. It's a direct insult to the god who sees everything from above. Then there's Zeus Xenios, protector of hospitality and guest friendship. In the ancient Mediterranean, travel is dangerous. Roads are uncertain. Outsiders are potential threats. But strangers can also be messengers, traitors, allies, even gods in disguise. So, the Greeks developed xenia, a sacred code. If someone comes to your door, you feed them, you shelter them, you treat them with dignity, and the guest in return respects the house. This isn't just politeness, it's survival ethics, and Zeus stands behind it like an invisible judge. That's why myths punish violations of hospitality so brutally. Because if you break xenia, you're not just hurting a traveler. You're breaking the system that keeps civilization human. A related role is Zeus of supplication. Supplication is when someone endangered clings to an altar or grasps the knees of a king, begging for protection. In Greek thought, that act transforms the person into something sacred, someone under Zeus's protection. Rejecting a suppliant isn't just cold, it's sacrilege. It's refusing a divine claim. So Zeus becomes the god who turns vulnerability into a kind of legal shield. But Zeus's justice isn't merely about protecting rules. It's about punishing the sin that threatens the entire cosmic hierarchy. Hubris. Hubris isn't just pride. It's overreach. It's when a mortal forgets the boundary between human and divine and acts like the boundary doesn't apply. And Greek myth is obsessed with that boundary because the world they lived in was full of reminders of human fragility. Plague, storms, famine, war. To survive, you needed humility. So Zeus becomes the enforcer of humility. And the myths give examples, over and over, like warnings carved into story. Take Ixion. Ixion is the first man in myth to murder a family member, killing his father-in-law. No one will purify him. He's unclean, dangerous, rejected. Zeus, in a rare act of mercy, takes pity. He purifies Ixion and even invites him to Olympus, an honor beyond anything a mortal deserves. And what does Ixion do with that gift? He lusts after Hera. He tries to touch what is forbidden, not just another man's wife, but the queen of gods, the symbol of marriage itself. So Zeus tests him, creating a cloud image of Hera. Ixion sleeps with it, revealing his intent. And then Zeus's punishment is mythic in its symbolism. Ixion is bound to a burning wheel that spins forever through the sky. A man who tried to rise above his station becomes a warning turning endlessly above everyone. Then there's Tantalus, a son of Zeus in some traditions, close enough to dine with the gods, and he violates the privilege. Some versions say he steals divine food. Some say he reveals divine secrets. The worst version says he kills his own son, cooks him, and serves him to the gods to test whether they're truly omniscient. It's the ultimate insult, treating the gods like fools. So Zeus punishes him in a way that becomes a word in our language, tantalize. Tantalus stands in water he can't drink. Fruit hangs above him he can't reach. Desire forever present, fulfillment forever denied. Justice as psychological torture. And Prometheus, one of the most complicated cases, shows Zeus's justice as both punishment and politics. Prometheus steals fire for humans, defying Zeus's attempt to control humanity's power. Zeus's response is famously brutal. Prometheus chained to a rock, an eagle eating his liver daily, the organ regenerating each night so the punishment never ends. But Prometheus isn't just a criminal. He's a challenger. And Zeus's justice here isn't only moral, it's territorial. It's the king asserting who gets to decide the boundaries of human advancement. Now comes the big tension. Zeus is judge. But Zeus also has daughters called the Fates. And sometimes myth implies even Zeus can't override them. In Homer, Zeus mourns when his son Sarpedon is fated to die. Yet he lets it happen. So what does that mean? Is Zeus truly supreme, if fate can bind him? The Greeks never fully resolved it because it mirrors a question humans never fully resolve. Is the universe ruled by a personal will or by an impersonal law? Some said Zeus is fate. Some said fate is above everyone. Some said Zeus chooses to respect the fates because order requires consistency. Whatever the answer, the emotional result is powerful. Under Zeus's sky, life is not random. Promises matter. Hospitality matters. Arrogance has a cost. Mercy can exist, but it isn't guaranteed. And whether you fear Zeus or worship him, the message is the same. Someone is watching, and the sky remembers. It's easy to talk about Zeus like he lives only in stories. Like he's a character, dramatic, entertaining, distant. But for the ancient Greeks, Zeus wasn't distant. He was practical. Because myth is what you tell at night. And worship is what you do when your harvest is dying, when a treaty is fragile, when a storm is coming, when you need justice and you don't trust humans to deliver it. To understand Zeus as a real historical force, you have to picture the places where people met him, places built not for imagination, but for ritual. Start with Olympia. When we hear Olympics today, We think sports, brands, modern spectacle. But the original Olympic Games were a religious festival. They were held for Zeus. And the center of Olympia wasn't a stadium. It was a sanctuary, a sacred complex filled with altars, treasuries, statues, and offerings. Because to the Greeks, competition was worship when it was done under divine witness. And there, towering over it all, stood one of the most famous buildings in the ancient world, the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. Inside was something that made visitors feel small in a way no story could. A statue of Zeus so enormous it became a legend. Zeus seated on his throne, crafted from gold and ivory, surrounded by carved detail and precious materials, as if the Greeks were trying to prove something with their hands. If our God rules the cosmos, then his image should overwhelm you. Ancient writers describe the experience like standing before a living presence, not because they believed the statue was Zeus, but because it was the point where human effort met divine reality. You didn't come to Olympia just to watch athletes. You came to stand in front of Zeus and remember who the world belongs to. And outside the temple, sacrifices happened on a scale that modern people can barely imagine. Animals weren't symbolic offerings. They were wealth. Meat was rare for most people. So a great festival sacrifice wasn't just religion. It was community economics. A sacred feast that turned worship into shared survival. Now, Zeus didn't live only in one great sanctuary. He was everywhere. But some places were older, so old they felt like Zeus was woven into the earth itself. Dodona is one of them. Dodona was a Zeus oracle, and in many traditions, it was older than Delphi. And it didn't work like Delphi. There wasn't a priestess breathing fumes and speaking in riddles. Dodona's voice came from something simpler and strangely intimate, an oak tree, a sacred oak associated with Zeus, where priests listened, not for thunder, but for the rustle of leaves, for the subtle language of wind through branches, for the sound of bronze vessels or objects hanging nearby, chiming as they moved. Imagine coming with the question that keeps you awake at night. Should I go to war? Should I marry? Is my city cursed? Will my child survive? And the answer isn't delivered as a clear sentence. It's interpreted from sound, from leaves, from metal tapping in the breeze. That's what ancient religion often was. Not certainty, but guidance. A sense that the world speaks if you learn how to listen. And whether you were at Olympia, Dodona, or a small local altar outside your village, the heart of Zeus worship was the same. Sacrifice. Here's what that looked like. A worshiper didn't arrive casually. They came in procession. They purified themselves with water. They brought an animal, goat, sheep, ox, depending on their means and the importance of the request. The animal might be decorated. Garlands, ribbons, a moment of beauty before blood. A priest, or the worshiper themselves in a smaller context, spoke a formal address to Zeus, calling him by the right titles. Not just Zeus, but Zeus the Oath Guardian, Zeus the Rainbringer, Zeus the Protector of Guests, because names were keys, and you wanted the right door to open. Barley grains were scattered. A ritual gesture that marks the moment as sacred. Then the animal was killed, quickly, ideally, because even in a world that normalized sacrifice, the act demanded control. The blood touched the altar. Smoke rose. Specific portions, often thigh bones wrapped in fat, were burned for the god. The rest was cooked and shared. That meal mattered, because it turned worship into a social bond. You weren't just feeding Zeus, you were feeding the community under Zeus. And prayer didn't look like silent private thought the way many modern people imagine it. For sky gods like Zeus, the posture often reached upward. Arms raised, face lifted, voice spoken out loud. You reminded Zeus of who you were, your city, your family, your past offerings. Then you asked for what you needed, and sometimes you promised what you'd give if the request was granted. That's not primitive. That's negotiation with the cosmos. And when thunder rolled afterward, when rain finally came, people didn't treat it as coincidence. They treated it as response. Which is why Zeus wasn't just myth. He was embedded in calendars, treaties, festivals, politics, family life, everywhere humans needed a power higher than other humans. And next, we need to talk about something that changed Zeus forever. Because once Greece begins to think like philosophers, Zeus doesn't disappear. He transforms from a god with a face into a god as an idea. There's a moment in Greek history when the questions change. People still fear storms. They still swear oaths. They still sacrifice at altars. But now, a new kind of person appears. Someone who looks at Zeus and asks, is that story really true? Or is it a symbol? And once that question exists, Zeus can never be only a thunder king again. Because Greek philosophy doesn't simply attack the gods, it reinterprets them. It turns Zeus from a personality into a principle. It starts with discomfort. Early thinkers looked at the old myths, Zeus cheating, Hera raging, gods lying, stealing, humiliating one another, and felt a moral problem. If the gods are divine, why do they behave worse than humans? One of the sharpest critics is Xenophanes, who mocks the way people imagine gods in their own image. If horses could paint, he says, they'd paint horse gods. Ethiopians imagine dark gods. Thracians imagine pale gods. The point is brutal. Myth reveals the worshipper more than the worshipped. And Xenophanes suggests a divine being that doesn't look human, doesn't act like a petty king, but rules through mind. One God, supreme, unlike mortals in body and thought. He isn't necessarily deleting Zeus. He's stripping Zeus down to something cleaner, something worthy. Then comes Heraclitus, who writes in riddles like a man trying to translate lightning into logic. Heraclitus sees reality as flux, everything changing, everything burning, everything becoming something else. But this change isn't random. It's governed by a rational principle he calls logos, word, reason, law. And he makes a statement that later echoes for centuries. Lightning steers all things. That's a shockingly Zeus-like image. Not Zeus as a bearded man in a palace, but Zeus as the steering force behind the universe's motion. A cosmic intelligence expressed through fire and change. Next, philosophers like Anaxagoras push the idea further. He speaks of nous, mind, as the force that orders chaos into cosmos. Again, not a mythic figure in a love triangle, but an organizing intelligence. It doesn't need eagles and thunderbolts to be powerful. It's powerful because it makes order out of disorder. And then Plato arrives, and the transformation becomes cultural policy. Plato is deeply suspicious of the old poets, not because he hates religion, but because he thinks bad myths create bad citizens. If you teach young people that Zeus lies, cheats, and abuses power, what kind of society are you training them to accept? So Plato argues the divine must be good, unchanging, worthy of imitation. The mythic Zeus becomes unacceptable as literal truth. But Plato doesn't throw Zeus away. He elevates what Zeus can represent: providence, order, moral law. In Plato's world, Zeus can become the face people already know, attached to a higher truth. Aristotle takes a different route. He imagines an unmoved mover, pure thought thinking itself, the ultimate cause behind motion and change. Aristotle doesn't need Zeus as a character, but he doesn't dismiss the tradition either. He implies something subtle. Ancient religion may have preserved fragments of truth, distorted into story. In other words, Zeus was never wrong. Zeus was primitive philosophy, a human attempt to name the highest force. Then the Stoics arrive, and this is where Zeus becomes almost indestructible. Stoicism is one of the most influential philosophies of the Greco-Roman world. For Stoics, Zeus is not merely a god. Zeus is nature. Zeus is reason. Zeus is fate. The cosmos itself is a living, rational being, and Zeus is its rational soul. Everything that happens, good, bad, painful, joyful, is part of Zeus's providential order. To live wisely is to align your will with Zeus's will, not through sacrifice, through acceptance, discipline, and rational virtue. This is why a Stoic can speak of Zeus in a way that sounds almost monotheistic. Zeus becomes the single organizing principle behind everything. And Stoics wrote hymns to Zeus, still using religious language, still sounding like worship. But now the worship is philosophical. Save us from ignorance. Teach us to follow law. Steer us through reason. It's a new Zeus. A Zeus who doesn't need temples, because he exists in the structure of reality itself. And that's the key. The mythic Zeus, the one who throws thunderbolts and seduces mortals, can be attacked, mocked, or rejected. But the philosophical Zeus, the Zeus who represents order, providence, and cosmic reason, that Zeus can survive even when people stop believing in Olympus. He becomes compatible with later theology. He becomes a bridge between pagan culture and new religious frameworks. When later thinkers, Roman intellectuals, early Christian writers, medieval scholars, look back at Greek thought, they don't always see Zeus as a false god. Sometimes they see Zeus as a name for a concept, law, mind, the rational fire in the bones of the universe. So over time, Zeus becomes two beings at once, a god in stories and a god in thought. And when the old religion begins to fade, when sacrifices stop, when temples close, one version of Zeus loses its home. But the other version, Zeus as idea, keeps walking, and then Rome inherits both versions. Rome takes Zeus, renames him Jupiter, and turns him into something the Greeks never fully did. A state symbol, a political engine, the god of empire. When Rome meets Greece, it doesn't just borrow art and stories, it absorbs them. And the biggest name Rome absorbs, then remakes into something unmistakably Roman, is Zeus. In Latin, he becomes Jupiter. But here's the twist most people miss. Rome didn't import a sky god out of nowhere. Jupiter already existed in Roman religion before Greek influence became dominant. In fact, his name points to something older than either civilization, an Indo-European root that essentially means Skyfather. So the Roman Jupiter and the Greek Zeus aren't strangers. They're distant relatives. Two branches from the same ancestral idea. A bright sky deity tied to thunder, oaths, authority, and law. What Greek culture adds is the mythology, the dramatic family tree, the love affairs, the Olympian soap opera. And what Roman culture adds is something else entirely, government. Because the Romans are not primarily interested in Zeus as a romantic chaos machine. They're interested in Jupiter as the backbone of the state. If Greek Zeus is a cosmic monarch, Roman Jupiter becomes a constitutional symbol. His most important title says everything about Rome's priorities. Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Jupiter, the best and the greatest. Not the most poetic, not the most mysterious. The best. The greatest. It's the language of empire. And his home in Rome is not hidden above clouds. It's built at the center of political life. The Capitoline Hill. The Temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus becomes Rome's most important religious building, tied directly to the city's identity. It isn't just a temple, it's a vault of legitimacy. When consuls take office, they sacrifice to Jupiter. When treaties are made, they swear by Jupiter. When generals return victorious, they march to Jupiter, because the Roman state needs something bigger than any individual leader. It needs a divine guarantee. And Jupiter provides it. This is where the Roman relationship with Zeus diverges sharply from the Greek one. Greek religion is deeply local, fragmented by city-states. Zeus is supreme, yes, but his worship varies widely across regions. Roman religion is centralized and civic. It treats the gods as partners in the success of the state, and Jupiter is the senior partner. You can see that in Rome's most famous ceremony of power, the triumph. A Roman general wins a major victory. The Senate grants him a triumph. And suddenly the city becomes a stage for a ritual that's half parade, half religious submission. The victorious commander rides in a chariot. He wears garments associated with Jupiter. In some traditions, he is painted or styled in a way that evokes Jupiter's cult statue, like he's temporarily embodying the god's authority. But Rome, being Rome, never lets a human forget what humans are. A slave stands behind him and whispers, "Remember, you are mortal." That line is cold genius. The general is made godlike for a day, but reminded he isn't a god. Because in Rome, divinity legitimizes power, but divinity must never be confused with the human who wields it. At the end of the triumph, the procession goes to Jupiter's temple. Sacrifices are offered, thanks are given. The victory isn't truly complete until Jupiter is acknowledged as the source and witness. This isn't just religion, it's political psychology. It tells every Roman citizen, Rome wins because Jupiter wills it. And it tells every Roman leader, your authority is borrowed. Jupiter also anchors Rome's legal identity. Treaties sworn in Jupiter's name aren't just agreements. They're sacred contracts. Breaking them becomes a religious crime and a political threat. That makes Jupiter the ultimate guarantor of Roman trust, between cities, between allies, between rulers and ruled. The Romans give Jupiter many titles, each one like a specialized tool. Jupiter Tonans, the Thunderer; Jupiter Pluvius, sender of rain; Jupiter Fulgurator, of lightning. These sound familiar because they echo Zeus's roles, but in Rome, these roles plug directly into state welfare. Rain matters for crops and public stability. Lightning matters as omen for political decisions. Thunder matters as divine commentary on Rome's fate. Roman writers reinforce this view. In epic poetry, Jupiter becomes the architect of destiny. In some Roman narratives, he is more deliberate and foresighted than Homer's Zeus. He isn't just reacting to divine drama. He is steering history toward Rome's rise. That's not accidental. It reflects Roman ideology, the belief that Rome is chosen, appointed to rule, not as a random accident, but as a fulfillment of cosmic order. And then there's the symbol that outlives everything. The eagle. The sacred bird of Zeus becomes the imperial bird of Jupiter. Roman legions carry eagle standards. The eagle becomes shorthand for sovereignty, conquest, supreme authority. And once that symbol is planted in the imagination, it doesn't die when Rome does. Later empires copy it. Kingdoms copy it. Nations copy it. Even in the modern world, when you see the eagle as a political emblem, you're seeing the long shadow of Jupiter, Rome's version of Zeus, turned into a symbol of rule. So Jupiter is Zeus, but filtered through Roman needs. Less mythic chaos, more institutional power. But then history shifts again, because a new religion enters Rome, one that refuses to sacrifice, refuses to acknowledge Jupiter. And suddenly the god of the state faces something thunderbolts can't strike, a cultural revolution. For centuries, Jupiter felt unbreakable. He wasn't just a god. He was Rome's public heartbeat, woven into elections, treaties, wars, triumphs, the very idea of what it meant to be Roman. So when a new movement appears and refuses to participate, it doesn't look like a different spirituality. It looks like sabotage. That movement is Christianity. And the clash between Jupiter and Christianity isn't mainly about philosophy at first. It's about a ritual, sacrifice. In the Roman world, offering sacrifice wasn't only religious devotion. It was public loyalty, a civic act, like saluting the flag. It said, I belong to this order. So when Christians refuse to sacrifice, to Jupiter, to the gods, and later to the emperor's divine honors, Rome doesn't just hear, I have a different god. Rome hears, I reject your community. I reject your authority. I reject the agreement that holds your society together. That's why early Christian refusal could be treated as a political threat, even treason. The empire didn't demand everyone believe the same stories in private. Rome was used to diversity. It tolerated many cults. What it demanded was outward participation, a pinch of incense, a public gesture. Christians wouldn't do it. And this creates a pressure cooker. Intermittent persecution, public suspicion, legal penalties, martyr stories circulating like wildfire. Meanwhile, Christian writers attack Jupiter with a weapon Rome can't easily counter: moral ridicule. They point to Zeus's mythology, his affairs, deception, violence, and say, if that's your god is corrupt. Even more, they argue that the gods are not gods at all, either empty idols or demons masquerading as divinity. To a pagan Roman, that sounds insane. To a Christian, it's clarity. And here's where the story becomes deeply ironic. The philosophical Zeus, the Stoic Zeus as logos, as cosmic reason, actually gives Christianity language it can reuse. Early Christians can speak of divine reason, providence, the word, ordering the cosmos. They can quote Greek poets, echoing familiar ideas to connect with educated audiences. So, Christianity fights Zeus on one front, while absorbing some of the intellectual atmosphere that Zeus helped create. Then history hits a turning point. The Roman Empire slowly becomes Christian. The decisive steps are complex, political, social, spiritual, but the end result is clear. A religion that once refused to sacrifice becomes a religion that defines the empire's identity. And once that happens, Jupiter's temples begin to lose their oxygen, because pagan worship isn't killed in a single day. It's suffocated over time. Public sacrifices are restricted, then banned. Temples are closed or repurposed. Priests lose status. Festivals weaken. And one symbolic moment hits like a closing door. The ancient Olympic Games, founded as a festival to Zeus, later tied to Jupiter, are abolished in late antiquity. The traditional date often cited is 393 CE, during the reign of Emperor Theodosius the Vain, when bans on pagan cult practice tightened and the old ritual world began to go silent. 1,000-year rhythm, athletes, oaths, sacrifices, smoke rising at Olympia, ends. Not because people stopped loving competition, but because the god the competition honored no longer had a legal place to stand. And that's the strange truth about religious death. It rarely looks like a dramatic battle. It looks like empty altars, quiet temples. No more blood on the stones. No more prayers spoken upward with arms raised to the sky. So does Zeus die? As a living religion? Yes. But as a cultural presence? Not even close. Because you can close a temple, you can't close a memory. Jupiter's name stays attached to the largest planet in the sky. His character survives in words. Jovial, meaning cheerful, tied to Jove. In Romance languages, Thursday still carries his name, the day of Jupiter, lingering in ordinary speech. Artists keep painting him. Poets keep referencing him. Myths keep circulating. And symbols, especially symbols, outlive belief. The eagle, once sacred to Zeus, once imperial for Jupiter, keeps appearing on banners and seals long after nobody is sacrificing bulls on the Capitoline. This is how gods become ghosts that still shape culture. The religion ends. But the archetype remains. The Skyfather, the Thunder King, the judge above. And that leads us to the final question. Maybe the most important one. If Zeus isn't worshipped anymore, why does he still feel familiar? Why does his silhouette still stand in the imagination of the West? Because Zeus didn't just rule Greece. He helped form how later civilizations imagined power, justice, and the universe itself. And that's where we end our journey. With legacy. Not the story of a god, but the story of an idea that refuses to disappear. So here we are. We've walked from a prehistoric Skyfather, half language, half storm, into the marble world of Olympus. We watched a hidden child survive a devouring father. We watched wars that remade the universe. We watched Zeus become weather, become law, become dynasty, become ritual, become philosophy. We watched Zeus turn into Jupiter, and then watched Jupiter lose his altars to a new faith. And the obvious conclusion should be simple. Zeus is dead. No temples, no sacrifices, no priesthood speaking on his behalf. But if Zeus is dead, why does he still feel so alive? Why can you say the name Zeus right now and almost everyone instantly knows what you mean? The answer is that Zeus was never only one thing. Zeus is not just a character. Zeus is a template, a blueprint human beings used, over centuries, to explain the biggest forces they could not control. Storms, authority, justice, fate, family, power. For ancient people, the sky wasn't a neutral backdrop. It was a ceiling of mystery. The sound of thunder didn't come with a scientific explanation. Lightning didn't come with a textbook. Rain didn't come with a forecast. It came, or it didn't, and the difference could decide whether you ate. So Zeus became the face of that uncertainty. Not because ancient people were stupid, because they were human. They looked up into something overwhelming and asked, "Who is in charge of this?" And Zeus was their answer. But Zeus also did something more subtle. He gave structure to power. A king of gods ruling from a high place is more than fantasy. It's a mirror. Greek kings and later Roman rulers loved Zeus and Jupiter because these gods made authority feel natural, sacred, cosmic, above debate. If Zeus rules, then hierarchy isn't just a human invention. It's the way the world works. That's why Zeus mattered politically, why his temples stood beside courts, why treaties swore his name, why festivals made him the center. Zeus wasn't only religion, he was legitimacy. And then there's justice. In a world where life could feel unfair, where the wicked sometimes prospered and the innocent sometimes suffered, Zeus offered something humans crave: the belief that actions have consequences, that someone sees, that oaths mean something, that hospitality is sacred, that arrogance, hubris, will eventually be answered. Even if the myths sometimes show Zeus as inconsistent, even if the stories reveal him as emotional or biased, the worship-level Zeus served a function that goes beyond entertainment. He gave moral gravity to reality. He made the world feel watched. But we can't talk about Zeus's legacy honestly without facing the shadow. Because Zeus's mythology also includes things modern people struggle to hear: coercion, deception, abuse of power, women punished for a god's desire, children turned into targets of jealousy. Those stories weren't accidents. They reflected the patriarchal world that told them. A world where power was uneven, where women's choices were constrained, where male authority was celebrated and female suffering could be framed as collateral. Understanding that doesn't mean excusing it. It means seeing mythology as what it often is: a civilization telling the truth about itself, even when it doesn't realize it's confessing. So Zeus survives in our culture in two ways at once. He survives as spectacle: thunder, lightning, Olympus, gods and drama. And he survives as symbolism: power above, law above, sky as witness, the eagle as sovereign emblem, the thunderbolt as authority. Even modern fiction keeps rebuilding him. Every time a story needs a king of gods, every time a fantasy world needs a pantheon, every time a superhero universe needs a thunder-wielding archetype, Zeus's silhouette returns. But here's the deepest legacy, and it's quieter than lightning. Zeus represents the moment humans decided the universe was not pure chaos, that there is order, that there is hierarchy, that there is meaning. Even if we no longer believe in Zeus as a literal being, we still wrestle with the same questions Zeus once answered for millions of people. Is the world governed by anything? Is justice real? Or only something we wish existed? Does power serve order? Or does power simply take what it wants? And what happens when authority is immense, but morality is complicated? Zeus doesn't solve those questions for us anymore. But he shows us how ancient people lived inside them, and that's why his story still matters. Not because we should revive his worship, because understanding Zeus is understanding a huge piece of human history. The history of fear and awe, of kings and laws, of storms and survival, of our need to name the forces above us. So as we close this chapter, remember, the temples are ruins. The sacrifices are silent. The thunder isn't a god, it's weather. And yet, when lightning splits the sky, you still feel it in your chest. That jolt of awe. That reminder of how small we are. That feeling is ancient. And in that feeling, whether you call it science, nature, or mystery, Zeus still whispers from the edge of human memory. If Zeus were real, not as a god to worship, but as a symbol, what would he represent to you today? Justice? Power? Nature's awe? Or something darker? And do you think humanity has ever outgrown the need for a Skyfather? Or do we just rename him in every new age? One of the easiest mistakes we make is thinking Zeus was the same everywhere. Like there was one official version, one personality, one brand stamped across the Greek world. But Greek religion wasn't a single church with one doctrine. It was a patchwork. Hundreds of cities, thousands of local shrines, different landscapes, different needs, different histories. So when the Greeks said Zeus, they often meant something more specific. Which Zeus? Because Zeus wasn't only Zeus. He was Zeus with titles, epithets, names that acted like coordinates on a map. Zeus of this mountain, Zeus of that city, Zeus as this function, Zeus as that power. And those epithets weren't decoration. They were identity. In Athens, for example, Zeus could appear as Zeus tied to the life of the city: order, civic stability, the public square where politics and religion mixed. Athens, a place obsessed with law and rhetoric, didn't worship Zeus only as a thunder weapon. They worshipped him as a guarantor of social fabric. But go to Olympia and the mood shifts. Olympia isn't a debating club. It's a sacred arena. There, Zeus is Zeus the victor. Zeus the judge. Zeus the one who watches bodies strained to the limit, who sees whether an athlete cheats, whether an oath is broken, whether honor is real or just performance. The Olympic Games weren't sports first. They were worship first. Athletes didn't only train, they swore. They swore to compete fairly. They swore discipline. They swore under Zeus's eyes. So the Zeus of Olympia feels less like a philosopher's idea and more like a living referee of human ambition. Then there's Dodona. And Dodona feels older, more primitive in the best sense, closer to the roots. At Dodona, Zeus speaks not through polished speeches or marble grandeur, but through nature itself. The oak leaves, the wind, the metallic chime of hanging objects. It's Zeus as an environmental presence, an intelligence hidden inside sound. And interestingly, Zeus at Dodona is often paired with another figure, Dion, a goddess whose name looks like the feminine mirror of Zeus's name, suggesting something ancient, a memory of older pairings, older divine structures that later Greek tradition folded into Zeus's supremacy. So the Zeus of Dodona doesn't feel like the Zeus of a royal palace. He feels like the Zeus of the forest. And then, across Greece, these local Zeuses multiply. Zeus Xenios, protector of guests. Zeus Horkios, guardian of oaths. Zeus Koronios, of lightning. Zeus Hyedios, of rain. Zeus Mylikios, gentle, appeasable, the Zeus you try to soften when fear rises in your stomach. Some epithets are comforting. Some are terrifying. Some preserve traces of older religions, older rites that may have existed before Greek language was even spoken in those valleys. A shrine that once belonged to a local storm spirit becomes Zeus, because Zeus is the roof that can cover anything. That flexibility is part of his power, and it's why Zeus becomes the supreme god without needing one rigid doctrine. He can be everything. He can be the storm above the sea, the law over the city, the whisper in the leaves, the oath in a courtroom, the rain on a dying field. This is also why poets can describe Zeus differently and still feel correct. Homer's Zeus is a king among squabbling immortals, political, calculating, sometimes emotionally torn. Hesiod's Zeus is more cosmic, victory codified, hierarchy established, legitimacy declared. Later philosophers stripped Zeus into reason, but all these versions can coexist because Greek religion allowed layers. It didn't demand a single face, it demanded results. If rain comes, Zeus answered. If lightning strikes, Zeus judged. If an oath holds, Zeus watched. And that raises a haunting question. When a god can be so many things, is he one being? Or is he the name humans give to the sky when they need it to mean something? If you want to see Zeus solidify into the Zeus we recognize today, you don't look only at temples. You look at poetry, because poetry was the ancient internet. It traveled faster than armies. It outlived kings. It standardized imagination across city-states that otherwise couldn't agree on anything. And two poets, whether single authors or names attached to long traditions, did more than anyone else to lock Zeus into a shared Greek identity, Homer and Hesiod. They're writing in roughly the same early window when Greek literacy returns after the Dark Age. And what they do is enormous. They take scattered local traditions and give Greece a coherent mythic world. But they don't present the same Zeus. Not exactly. Homer's Zeus, the Zeus of the Iliad and Odyssey, feels like a ruler in a political court. He's powerful, yes, but he's also diplomatic, strategic, sometimes constrained, sometimes negotiating with other gods the way a king negotiates with nobles. In the Iliad, Zeus is constantly weighing outcomes. He listens. He considers. He sometimes changes his mind, not because he's weak, but because he's managing a system with competing forces. He's the kind of king who understands that ruling is not a single act of violence. It's maintenance. And Homer shows Zeus as emotionally complicated too. There are moments when Zeus looks almost human in his pain. like when fate demands the death of someone he loves. His son Sarpedon is fated to die at Troy. Zeus feels grief. He considers saving him, and then he doesn't. Whether you interpret that as Zeus being bound by fate or choosing to respect fate, the effect is startling. The king of gods isn't a cartoon tyrant. He's a ruler in a world that contains rules, even for him. Homer's Zeus also functions like a moral referee, but it's not always clean. He doesn't punish everyone equally. He has favorites. He supports certain destinies. He's involved in the messy politics of the Trojan War. That's why Homer's Zeus feels alive. He's a king with a personality, and personalities come with contradictions. Now compare that to Hesiod. Hesiod's theogony is something different. It's not a war story. It's a constitution. It's the cosmic paperwork that explains who is related to who has authority, and why Zeus sits at the top. Hesiod gives you genealogy, the family tree of the universe. And more importantly, he gives you legitimacy. Zeus isn't just strong. Zeus is rightful. Hesiod's Zeus is the culmination of an evolutionary process, from chaos to earth and sky, to titans, to Olympians. Where Homer gives you Zeus in action, Hesiod gives you Zeus as the final solution to cosmic instability. Hesiod emphasizes succession, the violence between generations, and then shows Zeus as the one who stops the pattern. Kronos overthrows Uranus. Zeus overthrows Kronos. But then Zeus avoids being overthrown. How? By intelligence, by alliances, by absorbing threats before they mature, by marrying the forces that stabilize order, like Themis, law, and producing children who represent structured time, seasons, justice. Hesiod's Zeus looks like a king building institutions, not just winning fights. If Homer's Zeus resembles a wartime ruler, Hesiod's Zeus resembles the founder of a stable regime. And here's why that matters historically. In the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, Greek communities are emerging into a new era, city-states forming, laws developing, political identity solidifying. A god who represents stable order, who can justify hierarchy, oath-keeping, justice, and kingship, is incredibly useful. So Homer and Hesiod together do something brilliant. They give Zeus both faces the culture needs. Homer, Zeus the living political king, managing conflict. Hesiod, Zeus the cosmic legitimizer, making hierarchy permanent. That's why later Greece can recognize Zeus across distances. Even if Athens emphasizes Zeus one way and Olympia emphasizes another, they share a common mythic backbone. Because Homer and Hesiod become the baseline. They're the reason Zeus stops being only a local Skyfather and becomes a pan-Hellenic monarch. And that sets the stage for what happens next. Once Zeus has a standardized mythic identity, Greek cities can still reshape him, add epithets, merge him with local powers, but they're now remixing a shared core, a shared king. And it's that shared king that later philosophers will critique, that later Romans will adopt, and that later Christians will attack. But before all of that, we should look at the thing that made Zeus visible to everyone, regardless of literacy or poetry. Not his myths, not his laws, his signs, thunder, lightning, eagles, oracles, and the way Greeks read those signs like messages. A modern person sees a storm and thinks, pressure systems. An ancient Greek could see the same storm and think, a decision has been made. Because Zeus didn't only rule through myth. He ruled through signs, visible public phenomena that felt like messages. And those messages mattered because they shaped real choices. Should we go to war? Should we sail today? Should we trust this treaty? Should we crown this leader? In other words, Zeus wasn't just a god people worshipped. He was a communication system between human uncertainty and cosmic authority. Start with the most dramatic sign of all. Lightning. Lightning doesn't arrive politely. It cuts the sky open. It strikes without warning. It's loud enough to shake your bones. It leaves scars on trees, stone, roofs, and sometimes bodies. And to Greeks, lightning was rarely random. It was aimed. If Zeus controls the thunderbolt, then a lightning strike isn't merely weather. It's judgment, approval, or warning. That's why places struck by lightning could become sacred. A strike site might be marked, fenced, honored, even avoided because it was believed Zeus had touched that ground directly. Think about what that means psychologically. It turns the landscape into a map of divine attention. Certain spots become charged, not because a human declared them holy, but because the sky itself signed them. And once the landscape becomes sacred in this way, politics can't ignore it. A leader can say, "My policy is wise." But a thunderclap can say, "Zeus disagrees." Now add the second major sign, the eagle. Zeus's bird isn't chosen for cuteness or symbolism alone. Eagles fly high, higher than most birds, closer to the realm people imagined Zeus inhabiting. So, an eagle in the right moment felt like Zeus peeking into your life. This becomes a whole practice. Augury, interpreting bird flight. If an eagle appears on the right, if it circles, if it dives, if it cries, these patterns could be read like sentences, especially by trained interpreters. To modern ears, that can sound like superstition. But to a society living with constant uncertainty, it's a way of transforming fear into decision-making. Because the worst feeling isn't danger. It's danger without meaning. Omens give danger a shape you can respond to. And Zeus's signs were especially authoritative because Zeus was the supreme witness. A sign from Zeus wasn't a rumor, it was a stamp. Now consider Dodona. Because Dodona shows how this language of the sky could become institutional. At Dodona, the oracle didn't speak in a human voice. It spoke through sound, wind in leaves, bronze chiming, the subtle vibrations of the natural world. People brought questions, sometimes literally scratched onto lead tablets, and sought an answer. The priests listened. They interpreted, and that interpretation carried weight. Because if Zeus spoke, you didn't just disagree, you adjusted your plan. That's how religion shapes politics without needing armies. A city-state might be split over a policy. Leaders argue, factions form, violence threatens. Then someone says, "We should consult Zeus." And suddenly the debate isn't only among humans, it's handed upward. When the answer comes back, however cryptic, people can rally around it as something higher than personal interest. Oracles didn't eliminate conflict, but they gave conflict a referee. And Zeus, as the god of oaths and justice, was the perfect referee. Even public oaths could be framed as performances under Zeus's sky. A treaty isn't just ink on stone. It's a promise placed before the witness who punishes perjury. This is why treaties were sometimes displayed in sanctuaries, because the agreement lived under divine surveillance. To break it wasn't merely political betrayal. It was an invitation for Zeus to intervene. Now step back and notice what's happening. Zeus is becoming a kind of feedback loop. Humans make choices. They look for signs. Signs are interpreted. Choices change. That loop is religion operating as governance. It also explains why Zeus could remain central even as Greek society evolved. As laws became more complex, as politics became more sophisticated, people still wanted something above the law, something that could validate decisions beyond human bias. Zeus filled that role. He was not only the weather, he was the feeling that the cosmos had a voice. And once you believe the cosmos has a voice, you start asking a final, dangerous question. What happens when the king of gods speaks through law, but behaves in myth like a king who breaks his own rules? That contradiction, Zeus the judge versus Zeus the predator, becomes one of the deepest tensions in Greek culture. And it's also one reason later thinkers and later religions couldn't stop arguing about him. If you spend enough time with Zeus, you eventually hit a wall. A contradiction so obvious you can't unsee it. In worship, Zeus is the guarantor of justice. He protects oaths, hospitality, and the helpless. He punishes hubris. He watches the world like a moral ceiling. But in myth, Zeus lies. Zeus cheats. Zeus disguises himself to seduce. Zeus causes disasters that fall on people who never asked to be in his story. So which Zeus is real? The one you pray to, or the one you hear about? This is what scholars sometimes call the two Zeuses problem, but you don't need scholarship to feel it. Ancient people felt it too, because they weren't naive. They knew stories. They knew reality. They knew power is complicated. And Greek culture develops a surprisingly sophisticated way of living inside that contradiction. It doesn't try to erase it. It separates functions. Myth is one space. Cult is another. Myth is narrative, drama, entertainment, moral exploration, psychological pressure. It's the space where gods behave like magnified humans so humans can see their own world reflected back in divine scale. Cult is practice, ritual, prayer, community survival. It's not about gossiping about Zeus's love life. It's about reign, justice, safety, legitimacy. So, a Greek worshipper could sacrifice to Zeus Xenios for protection of guests, and later listen to a poet tell a story where Zeus violates someone's autonomy. And that didn't necessarily break their faith, because faith wasn't built on one literal consistency. It was built on relationship, on results, on the feeling that the sky listens. But that doesn't mean the contradiction was harmless. It becomes one of the engines of Greek literature, especially tragedy. Because tragedy is where a culture publicly wrestles with moral pain, and Zeus is often the shadow hanging over that wrestling. Take the central Greek fear, injustice. Not just bad things happen, but the deeper horror. Bad things happen and nobody answers for them. Zeus is supposed to answer for them. So when Zeus doesn't, or when Zeus seems to reward the wrong people, Greek storytellers lean into the tension. Sometimes Zeus is the source of order. Sometimes Zeus is the face of brutal, unaccountable power. And in tragedy, that tension becomes art. One of the clearest places to see Greek culture evolving its idea of justice is Aeschylus's Oresteia, a trilogy that doesn't simply entertain. It explains a shift in moral logic. At the beginning of the story world, justice looks like revenge. Blood calls for blood. A man kills, so he must be killed. A son avenges, so he becomes guilty. The chain never ends. It's a universe stuck in cycles, like a wheel. And the question is, how do you stop the wheel? The trilogy's answer is revolutionary. You replace vengeance with law. You build institutions, courts, trials, procedures, so justice becomes something a community administers, not something families carry out endlessly. And this shift is framed under divine authority. Zeus becomes tied not only to punishment, but to the transformation of justice into a system. In other words, Zeus evolves, not in the sky, in culture. The god's justice becomes the umbrella under which Greeks can imagine something new, civilized judgment. That doesn't make Zeus morally perfect. It makes Zeus useful as a symbol of moral progress. And this is how the two Zeuses can coexist. The mythic Zeus is raw power, desire, dominance, contradiction. The cultic Zeus is moral authority, oaths, hospitality, order. Greek culture doesn't pretend those are the same clean figure. It holds both, because human life holds both. We want justice, and we live under power. We want order, and we watch the strong break rules. Zeus becomes the divine image of that uncomfortable truth. This also explains why later philosophers tried to clean Zeus, turn him into logos, into cosmic reason. They weren't only doing abstract metaphysics. They were solving a cultural problem. How do we keep the moral Zeus and discard the scandal Zeus? And later, Christians attacked Zeus on the opposite front. They used the scandal Zeus to discredit the entire system. But in the Greek world itself, the tension remained productive. It generated stories, it generated debate, it generated art, and it kept Zeus present, not as a simple hero, but as the ultimate mirror of authority, necessary, fearsome, and never purely innocent. If you lived in ancient Greece, you didn't wake up thinking, I wonder what Zeus's personality is today. You woke up thinking, will the rain come? Will the ship return? Will my household stay safe? Will my city survive the year? And the way Greek religion handled those fears wasn't by producing one single abstract Zeus. It produced many Zeuses. Not different gods, but different faces, different functions, different ways to approach the same supreme power. That's what epithets were. Titles weren't poetic fluff. They were practical tools, because you didn't pray to Zeus in general when you were desperate. You prayed to the Zeus who handled your kind of disaster. Take Zeus Melikios. His name means something like gentle or easily appeased. That already tells you the emotional tone of the cult. This is the Zeus you approach when you feel you might have offended something larger than you can name, when guilt is in the air, when misfortune seems too patterned to be random. Malikios isn't Zeus, the Thunder King. Malikios is Zeus, the one you try to soften. Offerings to him could be strange compared to typical Olympian sacrifice, sometimes more chthonic in tone, more tied to purification, to the fear that a household or a city is carrying pollution, a stain that needs cleansing. Which leads to another epithet, Zeus Chthonios, Zeus of the earth. That sounds contradictory. Zeus is the sky god, right? But Greek religion didn't care about neat categories the way modern textbooks do. If Zeus is supreme, he can extend into every realm. So Zeus can be invoked in relation to the dead, the underworld, the earth's hidden powers, not because Zeus becomes Hades, but because Zeus's authority is imagined as overarching. Even death sits under the sky. Now go closer, not down. Closer to daily life. Zeus Katesios, household Zeus, the Zeus of property, possessions, stored wealth, the stability of your home. This Zeus isn't invoked in epic battle scenes. He's invoked in kitchens, in courtyards, in storage rooms where grain is kept safe from rot and theft. Some households honored Zeus Katesios with a jar, an object kept in the home as a kind of focal point for protection and prosperity. That's the kind of cult detail that tells you Zeus wasn't only a grand temple god. He was a domestic presence, the god who made the home feel sealed against chaos. And then there's Zeus Herkaios, Zeus of the courtyard enclosure, a protector of the boundary, because boundaries matter in ancient life. The boundary between house and street, between family and outsider, between safety and threat. An altar to Zeus Herkaios could stand in a courtyard like a spiritual fence post, signaling, this space is under divine protection. If you violate it, Zeus sees. Now scale up from the home to the city. Zeus Polius, Zeus of the city. Polis Zeus. This epithet matters because it ties Zeus directly into political legitimacy. It frames the city not merely as human construction, but as something held together by divine oversight. Rulers could claim they governed under Zeus Polius. Laws could be imagined as operating under his witness. Public sacrifices weren't only tradition, they were civic reinforcement. In Athens, for example, there were Zeus cults that became intertwined with civic identity. Rituals could be both religious and political theater, the community proving to itself that it was still coherent, still protected, still aligned with cosmic order. And then, of course, Zeus Xenios, the protector of guests and strangers. This epithet takes a social problem, how to treat outsiders, and turns it into a religious law. It makes hospitality sacred, not optional, by placing it under Zeus's authority. Which is genius, because once hospitality is sacred, violating it isn't merely rude, it's dangerous. It's a gamble against the sky. And Zeus Horkios, the oath Zeus, does the same thing for trust. Oaths aren't simply spoken words. They're binding threads in the social fabric. Zeus makes those threads feel unbreakable because breaking them invites divine punishment. Now, when you step back, something becomes clear. Greek religion is functional. It's not primarily about belief statements. It's about relationship and response. Different epithets of Zeus exist because human life has different forms of vulnerability. You can be threatened by famine, by disease, by war, by betrayal, by social breakdown, by spiritual pollution, by death itself. And Zeus, because he is supreme, becomes the umbrella under which all those fears can be addressed. This is why Zeus feels everywhere, not as one personality, but as a system of divine interfaces. A way of contacting power, a way of negotiating with the universe. And it also explains why Zeus could survive so long. Even as myth changed, even as philosophers reinterpreted him, even as political structures shifted, people still needed the same things: protection, reign, justice, stability. Zeus's epithets are proof that religion isn't only about stories. It's about need, and the needs never stop. If you want to understand Zeus as more than myth, there's one place you have to stand in your imagination: Olympia. Because Olympia wasn't just a sanctuary, It was one of the few things that could make the Greek world, normally fractured, competitive, often at war, feel briefly like a single civilization. And that unity didn't happen because Greeks suddenly became peaceful. It happened because Zeus created a space where rival cities agreed, at least for a time, to play by the same rules. The Olympic Games were not originally sports in the modern sense. They were a religious festival, a festival for Zeus. Every 4 years, athletes, envoys, merchants, poets, spectators, people from across the Greek world, traveled to Olympia not simply to compete, but to enter Zeus's presence. And the first thing that's easy to forget is this. Olympia was not neutral ground. It was sacred ground, which meant the rules were different. There was a concept tied to the Olympics called the sacred truce, ikacheria, an agreement meant to protect travel to and from the games. Even in a world where cities hated each other, Zeus's festival created a corridor of relative safety, because violating the truce wasn't only an offense against another city, it was an offense against Zeus. That's the power of religious authority in politics. It can enforce behavior where diplomacy fails. Now picture the sanctuary itself. The temple of Zeus dominates the space, but outside the temple sits something arguably more ancient, more visceral. The great altar of Zeus. Unlike modern altars made of clean stone, this altar was said to have grown over time, layer by layer, from ash and bones of sacrifices. It became a mound shaped by centuries of offerings, a physical accumulation of devotion. It's like the Greeks literally built Zeus's altar out of repetition, out of smoke, out of the remains of prayers. And at major moments, sacrifices weren't small. They could be massive. Hecatombs, the famous 100-oxen scale of offering. Imagine the sound, the smell, the procession. Animals decorated with garlands. The crowd gathered. The priests preparing. And then the kill, quick, ritualized, sanctioned, followed by smoke rising as the gods' share burned, and the communal feast spreading through the sanctuary like a social heartbeat. This is why the Olympics were so powerful. They weren't only entertainment, they were a collective act of worship that turned the Greek world into a temporary community under Zeus. Now look at the athletes. They didn't just show up and compete. They swore oaths. Before events, competitors took vows, promising to compete fairly, to respect the rules. Those rules weren't merely sportsmanship. They were religion. To cheat wasn't only dishonorable, it was sacrilege, because Zeus was the witness. That's why victory wasn't just personal pride. Victory was a statement. Zeus allowed this. Even if athletes trained brutally for years, even if genetics and skill mattered, the religious framing said success still required divine favor. And winners didn't just take glory and go home. They dedicated. They left offerings, statues, inscriptions, spoils, to Zeus. The sanctuary became crowded over time with evidence of human excellence and gratitude, a museum of ambition placed under divine oversight. The prize itself was almost absurdly simple. An olive wreath. No gold, no money, just leaves. But that simplicity is the point. The wreath wasn't wealth, it was honor. It was symbolic recognition at Zeus's festival that you had reached the peak of human potential, at least for a moment. And because Greeks were obsessed with honor, that recognition could matter more than riches. Olympia also became a stage for politics. City-states sent envoys. Alliances were discussed. Announcements were made. Rivalries played out not only in speeches, but in bodies running, wrestling, throwing, enduring. The sanctuary was a diplomatic theater disguised as a sports festival. And Zeus was the reason it could exist. Because the Greeks might not agree on laws. They might not agree on borders. They might not agree on who deserves power. But at Olympia, they agreed on one thing. Zeus is above us. That's why the Olympics could function as a cultural glue. They created shared rituals, shared stories, shared prestige. They standardized Greek identity across distance. When someone from a small city saw champions from Sparta or Athens or Thebes compete under Zeus's gaze, they weren't just watching sport. They were watching what it meant to be Greek, measured, judged, and celebrated in the presence of the King of Gods. And that's why the abolition of the games centuries later felt like more than ending an event. It felt like the closing of a sacred calendar. a rhythm that had tied Greece together under Zeus for generations. Olympia proves Zeus wasn't only worshipped. Zeus was used as an engine of civilization, a god who didn't just live in stories, but organized time. Every 4 years, the world returned to him. And that raises the next question. If Olympia is where Zeus unified Greece through competition and sacrifice, where did Zeus unify Greece through answers? Through prophecy, through decisions, through the sound of a god speaking back. That takes us to the other great sacred channel. Oracles, especially Dodona, and later Delphi's relationship to Zeus. If Olympia shows Zeus as the god who unifies Greece through ritual and competition, Dodona shows Zeus as something even more intimate, a god who answers questions. Because for ancient people, the hardest part of life wasn't only suffering, it was uncertainty. Should we go to war? Should we sail? Should we found a colony? Should we trust this marriage alliance? Should we change the law? A city can survive hunger, but uncertainty can split a city in half. So the Greeks built institutions to translate uncertainty into decision. They called them oracles. And the oldest and most purely Zeus oracle in the Greek world was Dodona. Dodona sits in Epirus, far from the polished cultural centers of Athens or Sparta, and that distance is part of its aura. It feels older, rougher, closer to the soil and the sky. At Dodona, Zeus is worshipped alongside Dion, a figure whose name looks like a feminine echo of Zeus's own, hinting at very old layers of belief. The pairing suggests Dodona preserved an ancient form of sky and earth religion before later Olympian storytelling streamlined everything into one dominant king. But the real magic of Dodona is how it speaks. Not through a dramatic priestess in a trance, not through smoke and fumes, through sound, through the oak tree. People believe Zeus's presence lived in or around a sacred oak, an oak whose leaves, stirred by wind, became a kind of divine language. Priests listened. They interpreted the rustling like speech coded into nature. Sometimes bronze objects, vessels or plaques, hung nearby and chimed when the wind moved them. That metallic ringing added another layer to the voice of the sanctuary. So, a question asked at Dodona wasn't answered by a sentence you could write down cleanly. It was answered like music, like weather, like a message that required interpretation. And that is exactly why Dodona felt authentic, because Zeus is the sky god. And Dodona makes Zeus speak like the sky speaks, not with perfect clarity, with signs. Now imagine the experience as a pilgrim. You travel for days. You arrive with a question that might decide your family's future. You offer a gift. You approach the sacred space. Your question is taken seriously, perhaps even written down on a small tablet, because in some periods, petitioners left questions recorded in simple language. Then you wait as priests listen and answer. Not everyone got the same type of response. Some answers were practical, some cryptic, some conditional. But even a cryptic answer could do something powerful. It gave a direction. It created a divine frame for decision. It made a risky choice feel sanctioned. That's why Zeus at Dodona isn't just theology. He's policy. But if Dodona is Zeus's old voice, Delphi is Greece's loudest microphone. Delphi is associated above all with Apollo, and yet Delphi belongs in Zeus's story because Greek religion is layered. Apollo is the prophet, the messenger, the interpreter, but Zeus is the ultimate authority behind order and fate. Think of Apollo like the spokesman and Zeus like the throne. At Delphi, leaders and city-states come not only for personal questions, but for statecraft. Colonies ask where to settle. Cities ask whether to fight. Kings ask how to legitimize rule. Lawgivers seek divine approval for reforms. Delphi becomes a strategic tool because a prophecy can unify a divided community. When factions can't agree, the oracle can declare a direction that feels above faction. And even when the answer is ambiguous, as Delphi famously could be, the ambiguity itself is useful. It allows leaders to claim divine backing while still leaving room for human flexibility. So you get two different styles of sacred authority. Dodona, Zeus as nature's voice. Oak leaves, wind, bronze chimes. Delphi, Apollo as divine interpreter. Structured ritual, famous priestess, national influence. And both shape politics in ways modern people might underestimate. Because in the ancient world, an oracle isn't an extra. It's legitimacy. It's how you make a risky decision and survive the backlash. It's how you convince people that sacrifice and suffering have a purpose. It's how you tie human plans to cosmic order. And Zeus sits at the top of that. Even if Apollo speaks, Zeus is the guarantor of oaths, of justice, of the order that makes prophecy meaningful. Without Zeus, an oracle is just noise. With Zeus, an oracle becomes destiny's paperwork. But oracles also reveal something about Greek psychology. They knew life could turn on forces beyond their control. So they built institutions to negotiate with those forces, to ask the sky for a sign, to make the future feel less blind. And the god behind the sky, however many names and faces he wore, was Zeus. To modern ears, sacrifice can sound like a strange relic, an archaic ritual, a dramatic image from a different moral universe. But for the ancient Greeks, sacrifice wasn't an odd extra. It was the core technology of worship. It was how you met the gods. And when the god was Zeus, supreme, sky-high, witness of oaths, sacrifice wasn't just personal devotion, it was community maintenance. So let's pull back the curtain and watch what a sacrifice to Zeus actually looked like. Not as a vague concept, as a scene. It often began with a procession. The animal, goat, sheep, ox, depending on wealth and occasion, was led through the space, sometimes decorated with garlands or ribbons. That decoration mattered. It wasn't only aesthetic. It signaled that the animal had been set apart from ordinary life. This is no longer livestock. This is an offering. People gathered. Priests or civic officials took positions. The crowd wasn't passive. This wasn't a private act. It was public, because Zeus, above all, was a public god. Oath guardian, city protector, political witness. Then came purification. Hands were washed. Sometimes participants sprinkled themselves with water. The idea was that you don't approach the divine in a state of ordinary mess. You cleanse. Not because you're perfect, but because you're acknowledging the boundary between human and God. You cross that boundary carefully. Then the ritual moved to the altar. For Zeus, being a sky god, the posture and direction mattered. The altar is open to the sky. The smoke must rise upward, because upward is where Zeus's realm is imagined. Now comes a small gesture that looks simple but is loaded with meaning. Barley grains are scattered. On the altar, sometimes on the animal. It's like a ritual punctuation mark. We begin now. Then the prayer. Greek prayers weren't usually vague, emotional monologues. They had a structure, almost like a legal formula. You address Zeus by name, often by epithet. Zeus Xenios, Zeus Horkios, Zeus Haitios, depending on what you're asking. You remind Zeus of relationship, not in a needy way, but in a transactional way. We have honored you before. We are your people. This city has offered you sacrifices. Then you ask, specific. Rain for the crops. Safety for the voyage. Victory in war. Justice against an enemy. Protection for the household. Confirmation of an oath. And sometimes you make a vow. If you grant this, we will offer more. It's negotiation with the cosmos, spoken out loud. Not because Zeus needs the sound, because humans need the commitment. Now the kill. Ideally, it is quick, controlled, ritualized. There are signs of consent built into some descriptions, like the animal being offered water so it nods its head, interpreted as agreement. Modern readers may find that unsettling or symbolic, but it reveals something important. Even in sacrifice, Greeks wanted to frame the act as ordered, not chaotic. A sacred killing, not a slaughter. Blood spills at the altar. That moment is the pivot. The offering has crossed from life into ritual. Then, the butchering. And here's the crucial detail that shows sacrifice is not only about giving, it's about dividing. Certain portions are for Zeus. Classically, it's the thigh bones wrapped in fat, the famous Prometheus trick echo, where humans keep the edible meat while the gods receive the smoke and the symbolic portion. Those parts are burned. the smoke rises. This is the god's share. Not because Zeus eats meat like a human, but because the scent, the upward motion, the transformation into smoke is what marks divine receipt. And what happens to the rest? The rest is cooked and eaten by the people. This is the part modern audiences often miss. Sacrifice is also a feast, a communal meal, a social bond. In the ancient world, meat is expensive. Most people don't eat it regularly. Festivals and sacrifices are when communities taste abundance. So sacrifice becomes a social engine. It redistributes resources. It reinforces hierarchy. Who gets which cuts? Who sits where? It creates togetherness through shared food. It binds the city into one body under Zeus's witness. Religion, economy, and politics fuse in one smell. Roasted meat and rising smoke. And the emotional atmosphere could vary. Some sacrifices were celebratory, after victory, at festivals, in moments of civic pride. Others were anxious, during drought, plague, war, when people felt the sky had turned against them. In those moments, sacrifice wasn't tradition, it was desperation made ritual, a way to say, "We acknowledge you, we respect the order, please, turn the storm away." This is why Zeus remained so deeply embedded in Greek life. He wasn't only a story, he was a mechanism, a way to handle fear, hope, uncertainty, and communal identity through action. And once you understand sacrifice as a social machine, the next step becomes clear. As Greece becomes more intellectual, more philosophical, more skeptical, how does sacrifice survive? How does Zeus survive? Because there's a point in history when educated people start asking, do the gods truly want this? And yet, the rituals continue, which means Zeus doesn't simply fade. He adapts. Here's the paradox of Greece. It invents philosophy, the habit of questioning everything, and yet it keeps sacrificing. It keeps praying. It keeps building temples. So what happens when a culture becomes intellectually sharp enough to criticize its own gods, but not willing or not able to live without them? Zeus doesn't disappear. He evolves. Because Greek religion wasn't a switch you flipped off once you learned logic. It was woven into civic life, into family rituals, into law courts, into political legitimacy. Even skeptical thinkers lived inside cities that swore oaths by Zeus, that held festivals under Zeus's name, that believed lightning could be a verdict. So educated Greeks developed ways to reconcile the old rituals with new reasoning. One strategy was allegory. The myths, they said, aren't literal history. They're symbols. Zeus isn't a man with a beard in the clouds. Zeus is the principle behind order. And the stories about him, his battles, his family drama, are poetic ways of expressing cosmic truths. This is how you can keep the cultural inheritance while cleaning it philosophically. You don't throw the myths away. You translate them. Another strategy was civic tradition. Some thinkers might privately hold unconventional ideas about divinity, but still publicly participate in rituals because rituals are part of social cohesion. They're the glue. They're how a city knows it's still itself. So, you can imagine an educated Athenian who doesn't believe Zeus literally seduced Europa as a bull, but still sacrifices at public festivals because to refuse isn't merely being rational, it's breaking trust. It's refusing membership. And then there's the strategy that matters most for Zeus's survival. Stoicism. Stoicism doesn't merely tolerate Zeus. It builds a whole universe around him. For Stoics, Zeus is not a mythic king. Zeus is logos, divine reason. Zeus is nature, the living rational order of reality. Zeus is providence, the intelligent structure behind events. Zeus is fate, not blind randomness, but a coherent plan. In Stoic thought, the cosmos is a living being, and Zeus is its rational soul. Everything that happens, every storm, every loss, every victory, fits into a bigger order, even if humans can't see the full pattern. That sounds abstract. But here's why it mattered. Stoicism gave Zeus a version that educated people could respect. A Zeus who wasn't embarrassed by myth. A Zeus who didn't need to be defended against moral criticism. Because this Zeus wasn't behaving badly. This Zeus was the law of existence itself. And this philosophical Zeus didn't erase worship. He reshaped it. You could still pray, still sing hymns, still sacrifice. But the meaning changed. Sacrifice became gratitude for the rational cosmos. Prayer became alignment of will with divine order. Worship became a practice of humility, accepting what happens as part of Zeus's providence and responding with virtue. This is why one Stoic text becomes so iconic. A hymn to Zeus, often associated with Cleanthes. It praises Zeus as the most glorious, steering all things with law. It asks Zeus to save humans from ignorance, to guide them toward understanding and right living. Notice what that hymn does. It uses traditional religious language, Zeus, Lord, ruler, but it's expressing philosophy. It's religion and reason fused into one voice. And that fusion is why Zeus becomes strangely durable. Because Zeus is no longer just a person in stories. He's a vocabulary for the cosmos. Now, not everyone agreed. The Epicureans went the other way. They argued gods exist but don't care about humans. They live in bliss, untouched by our prayers. That effectively removes Zeus from daily moral oversight. No providence, no divine judgment, just atoms and chance. And yet, Epicureans still lived in a culture saturated with Zeus's presence. Even if they denied intervention, they still used the language. They still navigated rituals as social reality, so Zeus remained everywhere, even in argument. And that's the key. A god can survive even when people disagree about him. In fact, disagreement can keep him alive longer, because the argument itself keeps returning to the same name. Zeus becomes the central reference point in a culture wrestling with meaning. Mythic Zeus. Entertaining, scandalous, dramatic. Cultic Zeus. Judge, protector, witness. Philosophical Zeus. Logos, reason, order. Three Zeuses, overlapping. And by the time Rome absorbs Greek culture, that layered Zeus is exactly what Rome inherits. Not one god, but a god with multiple skins, which makes the Roman version, Jupiter, capable of being both state power and philosophical principle. And that sets up the next act. When Rome becomes the center of the Mediterranean, Jupiter becomes the face of empire. And then, when Christianity rises, it attacks the face, but struggles with the idea. Because you can ban sacrifices, but you can't ban the question Zeus was built to answer. Is the universe ordered, or is it chaos? By the time Rome dominates the Mediterranean, Jupiter isn't just a god on a hill. He's the atmosphere of the state. He's on coins, in ceremonies, in public oaths, in the language of victory. And yet, at the same time, something else is happening, especially among educated Romans. Jupiter is becoming an idea, a philosophical force, because Rome doesn't only inherit Greek myths, it inherits Greek philosophy. So Jupiter becomes two things at once: the god of state power and the god of cosmic reason. This dual identity is everywhere in Roman intellectual life. Take Cicero. Cicero isn't a priest writing hymns. He's a statesman, a lawyer, a man obsessed with order. And in his discussions of the gods, Jupiter often appears as providence, divine governance over the cosmos. Not necessarily a bearded monarch throwing lightning out of anger, but the principle that keeps the world intelligible. When Cicero argues about natural law, duty, and the rational structure of the universe, Jupiter becomes a name for that structure. The gods aren't merely characters. They are the moral architecture holding society together. Then there's Seneca, a Stoic, deeply Roman, writing in a world where imperial power has become both dazzling and terrifying. For Seneca, Jupiter is basically fate with a conscience. He is the rational order of nature. He is the force you can't fight, only accept. And the Stoic project becomes almost spiritual. Align your mind with Jupiter's mind. If something happens, don't scream. Why me? Ask, what does this teach me? This is Jupiter turned into therapy. Not soft comfort, but hard discipline. A way to survive a brutal world without losing your soul. And this Stoic Jupiter spreads far beyond elite circles, because it matches Rome's emotional reality. The empire is massive. Life is unstable. Wars, plagues, political purges. the individual often feels powerless. Stoicism offers a way to endure. Jupiter becomes the name for meaning in a world you can't control. But here's what makes Rome uniquely volatile. While philosophers are abstracting Jupiter, emperors are weaponizing him. Because Rome's political system evolves into something the old republic never could have imagined. A single ruler holding enormous authority, surrounded by ritual, spectacle, and divine symbolism. An emperor doesn't want to look like a mere man. He wants to look like destiny. So emperors lean into Jupiter's imagery. The eagle, the thunderbolt, the title, father of the country, the language of providence. Some emperors style themselves as Jupiter's chosen agent. Others go further, implying they share Jupiter's divinity. And this produces what you might call an imperial theology. Rome rules because Jupiter wills it. The emperor rules because Jupiter backs him. Opposing the emperor becomes, by implication, opposing the divine order. It's brilliant. It's also dangerous, because once you link political loyalty to religious participation, you create a test that reveals dissent instantly: sacrifice. The empire expects public rituals, offerings to Jupiter, and in many contexts, honors to the emperor's genius or divine status. Most people in the Roman world can do this easily, because Roman religion is flexible. You can worship local gods and still honor Jupiter. You can adopt new cults without abandoning old ones. Rome doesn't ask you to believe one exclusive thing. It asks you to perform loyalty. Then Christianity enters. And Christianity breaks the system, not by violence, but by refusal. Christians won't sacrifice. They won't honor Jupiter as a real god. They won't treat the emperor's divinity as legitimate. To Roman officials, this doesn't look like harmless personal faith. It looks like sabotage of the social contract, because sacrifice is the glue that proves you belong. No sacrifice means no glue. And if too many people refuse the glue, the empire begins to feel unstable. That's why persecution, when it happens, often has a bureaucratic logic. It's not always emotional hatred. It's administrative fear. Just do the ritual. Just pinch the incense. Just say the words. Because for Rome, the ritual is what keeps the machine running. But for Christians, doing the ritual means committing idolatry, betraying the one God. So the conflict hardens. And now Jupiter is trapped between two forces: philosophers who can reinterpret him into cosmic reason, and a new religion that rejects him as a false power, even a demonic deception. And the strangest part is that both sides agree on something. The mythic Jupiter, the scandalous Zeus stories, are embarrassing. Christians use that embarrassment as attack. Your God is immoral. Philosophers solve it by abstraction. Those are symbols, not literal. So Jupiter survives intellectually, even as his altars become a battlefield, which sets up the next phase. The world doesn't just argue about Jupiter. It changes laws. It changes institutions. It changes what's allowed. And slowly, the god of Rome, once the guardian of treaties and triumphs, finds himself with fewer sacrifices, fewer festivals, fewer voices calling his name upward, until the silence becomes official. At first, nothing ends all at once. That's the thing about religious collapse. It rarely looks like a dramatic battle between gods. It looks like fewer footsteps, fewer festivals, a sanctuary that still stands, but feels emptier every year. Because when Christianity spreads through the empire, Jupiter doesn't get struck down by a new thunderbolt. He gets starved. Starved of ritual. Starved of public loyalty. Starved of the one thing Roman religion always depended on: sacrifice. For a long time, pagan worship and Christianity coexist in tension. People argue, people convert. People hedge their bets. Some hold multiple identities. Some keep old practices quietly while adopting new ones publicly. But eventually, the empire stops treating this as a private question. It becomes policy. And once policy turns against sacrifice, the ancient world begins to go quiet. Temples are still there. Massive stone, columns, pediments, carved gods frozen in marble. But the living heart is missing. No smoke. No blood on the altar. No communal feast. No priest raising hands to the sky and calling Zeus by 100 titles. Laws begin to restrict, then prohibit traditional cult practices. Public sacrifices are condemned as superstition or idolatry. Sanctuaries lose funding. Priests lose their civic authority. Festivals that once structured the year become harder to hold openly. Some temples are closed. Some are repurposed. Some are looted, neglected, abandoned. And you can imagine what that feels like if you grew up in a world where religion wasn't something you believed privately. It was something your community did together. It was the calendar. It was the rhythm of life. So the end of sacrifice isn't only theological, it's cultural shock. Because ancient religion was a public language, and suddenly the empire is saying, stop speaking it. Even places as iconic as Olympia, once the heartbeat of Zeus's festival world, fall into silence. The games that had tied Greek identity to Zeus for centuries are no longer sanctioned. The great cycle breaks. The sanctuary becomes a memory. And with that, Jupiter Zeus as a living religion effectively dies. Not instantly, but unmistakably. No one can keep a god alive without feeding him attention. And attention is what ritual does. But then something strange happens. Zeus does not disappear. He changes form. Because while religion can be legislated, culture is harder to kill. Stories survive in libraries and mouths. Artists keep sculpting and painting old gods, not as objects of worship, but as symbols of beauty, power, and heritage. Poets keep referencing Zeus because he remains the most efficient shorthand for certain emotions. Awe, authority, the sky's violence, and language keeps him alive in ways people don't even notice. The Romans called him Jupiter, and Jupiter becomes the name of a planet. So even in a Christian world, people keep saying his name every time they look at the night sky. Words like jovial linger, carrying the echo of Jove. Day names in parts of Europe preserve his shadow. Jove's Day, Thursday's ancestry in the Roman calendar. Even when people stop believing, they keep speaking the fossils of belief. And symbols persist even more stubbornly than words. The eagle, Zeus's bird, Jupiter's imperial emblem, keeps flying over history. Empires adopt it. Kingdoms adopt it. Nations adopt it. Not because they want to worship Zeus, but because they want what Zeus represented. Sovereignty, dominance, the authority that comes from above. The thunderbolt survives too. It becomes iconography of power, military, political, even modern pop culture. Lightning as authority, electricity as might, a weapon of the sky. Zeus becomes an archetype the West can't fully shake. The Skyfather, the ruler on the mountain, the one who judges from above. So, in a sense, Zeus has two deaths and two afterlives. He dies as a religion when sacrifice ends, but he lives as an idea, an image, an inheritance. And the afterlife might even be more durable than the worship, because worship requires belief. Archetypes don't. Archetypes only require imagination, and imagination is harder to regulate than ritual, which brings us back to the final truth. Zeus was never only an ancient Greek god. He was a human solution to certain eternal needs. The need to name the sky. The need to justify power. The need to believe justice exists. The need to turn thunder into meaning. That's why he keeps returning. Every time we tell stories about gods, kings, fathers, and the forces that rule above us. Zeus's temples are ruins, but Zeus himself, he's everywhere. Not as a religion. As a character template, the modern world can't stop rebooting. Because creators, writers, filmmakers, game designers, keep returning to Zeus for the same reason ancient Greeks did. He's the perfect symbol of power. Not clean power, not wholesome power. Power with thunder in its hands, and chaos in its personality. Look at how Zeus survives across time like a celebrity who never truly retires. In classical art, he's carved as a sovereign, bearded, massive, seated like the world is a chair built for him. In Renaissance painting, he becomes spectacle, dramatic light, divine bodies, myth turned into a stage for desire and beauty. In literature, Zeus becomes shorthand, a single name that can summon the entire idea of a sky king in one breath. You don't need to explain him. You just say Zeus, and the audience feels the shape of the myth. Then the modern era hits, and Zeus becomes adaptable in a new way. Because modern culture loves two things: superpowers and messy family drama. Zeus offers both. In comics and superhero stories, he's an easy bridge between ancient myth and modern scale. He already has cosmic authority, already throws lightning, already has a dysfunctional divine family. You can drop him into a modern universe and he fits immediately, like a myth wearing a new costume. In film and TV, Zeus becomes either grand or ironic. Sometimes he's pure spectacle: the booming voice, the glowing throne, the sky opening like a cathedral. Other times he's played as a corrupt CEO of Olympus, a powerful father figure who thinks the rules don't apply to him, surrounded by children who resent him but still orbit his gravity. And in video games, Zeus becomes a boss fight. Because games love gods as enemies, you can't get bigger stakes than punching the sky itself. Zeus becomes the final authority you challenge, the symbol of a system you want to overthrow. The top of the pyramid, which is fascinating because it flips the ancient story. In Hesiod, Zeus is the rebel who overthrows a tyrant. In many modern retellings, Zeus becomes the tyrant you overthrow. Same lightning, different moral lens. That tells you something about how culture shifts. Ancient Greeks often needed Zeus to represent stability, a final order that ends cosmic war. Modern audiences, living in an age suspicious of authority, often need Zeus to represent the problem. Unchecked power, patriarchal rule, might makes right, disguised as destiny. But even when he's villainized, Zeus is still central, because he's still the image of the top. And the top is always the most interesting place to attack. Zeus is also endlessly reusable because he embodies contradictions that feel human. He's the protector of justice, and the one who breaks rules in myth. He's the guarantor of oaths, and the master of deception. He's the father, and the source of half the family's trauma. That complexity makes him narratively rich. You can tell 100 stories with Zeus and never repeat the same emotional theme. You can tell a story about authority and responsibility, a story about desire and consequence, a story about legacy and inheritance, a story about the fear of being replaced, a story about a ruler who can control storms but can't control himself. And modern culture loves flawed gods because flawed gods feel relevant. A perfect deity is distant. A flawed deity feels like a commentary on real leadership. And that's why Zeus is still alive in the imagination. He's not just the strongest. He's the strongest with cracks. Now here's the fun experiment, one that makes Zeus feel suddenly modern. If Zeus were born today, if the Skyfather archetype emerged in the 21st century, what would he look like? Would he still be a king on a mountain? Or would he be the ruler of something more modern than Olympus? Maybe he'd be a head of state with nuclear codes, because the thunderbolt, in our age, isn't lightning. It's weapons. Maybe Zeus would be a tech titan controlling the sky in a new sense. Satellites, drones, global communication, the invisible infrastructure above our heads that shapes modern life. Or maybe Zeus would be what he's always been. Not a person, a pressure. The feeling that something higher is watching. Because even in a scientific world, storms still make us small. Even in a modern world, power still feels like weather. It can nourish you or destroy you, and you don't always get to vote on whether it arrives. That's Zeus's real modern role. He's the myth we use when we want to talk about power like it's nature, and nature like it's judgment. So Zeus doesn't survive because people believe in Olympus. He survives because we keep needing stories about the sky, about what rules us, about what scares us, about what we hope is just, and what we fear is simply strong. If you tell Zeus's story honestly, you can't keep him polished. Because Zeus is not only a symbol of awe and order, he is also a symbol of what happens when power believes it's entitled. And that's where modern audiences flinch. Not because we're too sensitive, but because we recognize the pattern. We've seen it before, just without thunderbolts. In many myths, Zeus's desire is treated as destiny. A woman doesn't so much choose him as get chosen by him. And once a god chooses you, refusal is rarely framed as an option. Sometimes Zeus approaches through force, more often through disguise. A bull, a swan, a shower of gold, a husband's face. The myth may frame these as clever transformations, but when you pause, the ethical shape becomes clear. Deception cancels consent, power imbalance distorts choice, and the consequences don't fall on Zeus. They fall on everyone else. The woman is left with a pregnancy she didn't ask for, or a reputation she can't defend, or a life turned into a story told by strangers. And then comes Hera. Hera is often portrayed as jealous, vindictive, the villain wife of Olympus. But look closer and you see something darker and more human. Hera is trapped in a system where she can't punish the source of betrayal. She can rage, she can threaten, she can humiliate. But Zeus is untouchable, so her anger spills downhill. Onto the women Zeus pursued, onto their children, onto the vulnerable. That's not just myth drama. That's a recognizable structure of patriarchy. When the powerful man is protected by the system, conflict gets redirected into violence among those who have less power. Women are set against women. Victims become targets. And the king remains king. If you want to feel how brutal this is, imagine the myth from the mortal perspective. You're not a character in a poem. You're a person. You have a family, a name, a future. Then the sky decides you're part of a divine narrative. A god arrives, or a disguise arrives, or a force you can't refuse arrives. And afterward, your life doesn't return to normal. Because now you're connected to Zeus. And that connection is not safety. It's exposure. It's being watched by Hera. It's being hunted by rumors. It's being turned into a moral lesson for people who will never know your voice. This is why some modern retellings shift perspective, away from Zeus and toward those he touches. Because the ancient myths often treat mortals like scenery, a place for divine drama to land. But modern ears keep asking, what did it cost them? Now, there's another layer to this. Some scholars point out that Zeus's sexual unions also function as cultural integration, myths linking local cults to the Olympian order. Zeus fathers heroes and dynasties to connect regions, cities, families into a shared mythology. That may be true historically, but historically functional isn't morally clean. Sometimes a culture's way of unifying itself is built on stories that normalize domination. Zeus's mythology can be read as a mythic justification of male entitlement. The supreme male power takes what he wants, and the world rearranges itself around the result. The gods are not meant to be role models. They are meant to be explanations, and the explanations reveal the society that produced them. So what do we do with this? Do we cancel Zeus? Do we say the story is too ugly to tell? No. Because Zeus is not a self-help figure. He's a historical mirror. Studying Zeus doesn't mean admiring his behavior. It means understanding what ancient civilizations believed about authority, gender, fate, and order. Zeus shows you how a society can hold two truths at once: the desire for justice and stability, the acceptance of brutality from the powerful. And that tension is not only ancient, it's timeless. That's why Zeus remains relevant, not as a god to worship, but as a case study in how humans mythologize power, how we excuse it, how we fear it, how we dress it in divine language. And if you want the final irony, it's this. Zeus is remembered as king of gods, but his most enduring legacy might be that he reveals the human obsession with kingship itself. The need to imagine a ruler above, a father above, a judge above, even when that judge is flawed. Because maybe, deep down, the point of Zeus was never moral perfection. The point was control. A universe with Zeus feels controllable, even if he's scary. A universe without Zeus feels like weather with no meaning. And humans have always hated that. So Zeus becomes the story we tell to make thunder feel like a verdict, even when the verdict isn't fair. By now, Zeus might feel like a story we're dissecting, a character, a symbol, a messy mythic patriarch with lightning in his hands. But if we stop there, we miss the most important truth. Zeus shaped history, not by physically throwing thunderbolts at armies, but by shaping how people thought power should work. Because when a civilization worships a god for 1,000 years, that god becomes more than belief. He becomes infrastructure. Start with law. Greek cities didn't have modern police systems or national courts the way we think of them. A huge part of social stability depended on trust, on promises that actually meant something. That's why Zeus as oath guardian mattered. When treaties were sworn, when alliances were made, when a man gave his word publicly, Zeus was invoked as witness. That created moral weight. It made lying costly, not always in practice, but in fear. And fear is a powerful social tool. Even the suspicion that Zeus punishes perjury could keep agreements intact longer than human enforcement alone. Then there's diplomacy. In a world of competing city-states, religion could create shared ground when politics couldn't. Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries, Olympia, Dodona, Delphi, became meeting points, neutral zones where cities could negotiate under divine authority. If you want to understand why Greece could feel like a cultural unit despite constant rivalry, Zeus is part of the answer. Because Zeus provided a shared ceiling. Even when cities fought, they still spoke the same sacred language. They still honored the same king of gods. And festivals like the Olympics weren't only games. They were a ritual system that periodically reminded Greece, you belong to something bigger than your city's borders. Now look at kingship. The Greek world didn't always love kings. Some city-states became fiercely anti-monarchical, but the concept of legitimate authority still needed divine backing. Zeus offered that backing. A ruler could claim to govern under Zeus's order, to uphold Zeus's justice, to protect Zeus's sacred customs. And later, in Rome, Jupiter becomes almost synonymous with the state itself. Jupiter Optimus Maximus as the divine stamp on Roman political dominance. That matters because political power isn't only swords. It's narrative. People obey when they believe obedience is natural, moral, or inevitable. Zeus helped make hierarchy feel cosmic. Then there's art and architecture. Temples to Zeus were not just religious buildings, they were economic and political statements. Building a temple meant organizing labor, wealth, and materials at a scale only a powerful community could manage. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia, the Olympeion in Athens. These projects were declarations. We are important enough to honor the King of Gods properly. And inside those temples, cult statues weren't mere decoration. They were presence. A city's ability to host Zeus in gold, ivory, marble was a kind of sacred prestige. You weren't just worshiping Zeus. You were competing, symbolically, for his attention. Even storytelling itself becomes a historical force. Homer and Hesiod didn't only entertain, they standardized Zeus. They gave Greece a shared mythic constitution that could travel beyond local shrines. Poetry became the vehicle for cultural unity. Zeus became a common reference point across geography, class, and time. And once Zeus was standardized, he could be remixed. Cities could add epithets, local myths, unique rituals, but the core remained recognizable. That's why Zeus became exportable. That's why Rome could adopt him as Jupiter. That's why Christianity had to argue against him. You don't argue against something irrelevant. You argue against what still dominates the imagination. Even philosophy, supposedly the enemy of myth, was shaped by Zeus's shadow. Stoics used Zeus as logos. Platonists used Zeus as divine intellect. Debates about fate, providence, justice often used Zeus as the name of the problem. Zeus becomes the vocabulary of cosmic order, even for people who no longer believe in Olympus. So, when we say Zeus shaped history, it isn't mystical, it's structural. He shaped how people trusted each other, how cities justified decisions, how rulers framed legitimacy, how communities formed identity, how the sky became moral, how power became sacred. And that's why the fall of Zeus worship isn't just the end of a cult, it's the end of an entire way of interpreting reality. A world where thunder is speech, where rain is blessing, where fate is negotiated through sacrifice, where justice is guaranteed by the sky. But the story is so vast, spanning millennia, that most viewers need something halfway through a long video. A reset, a montage, a map. A moment that gathers all the threads so the brain can hold them again. So next, we're going to zoom out. We'll do a big recap, fast, cinematic, connecting every major arc we've covered. Origin, rise, wars, justice, worship, philosophy, Rome, collapse, afterlife. Not as repetition, as reinforcement, as momentum. Close your eyes for a second. Not to escape, to rewind. Because the story of Zeus is so vast, so layered, that your mind needs a map before we push deeper. So here it is, the whole arc, in one breath. It begins before Greece even exists, before marble temples, before Homer, before the word Zeus is spoken in the form we know. It begins with a prehistoric idea carried across continents, the Skyfather, a bright watching, thunder-speaking power above the world, a father in the heavens, a witness to oaths, a force that made storms feel like judgment. Then the Greeks arrive, waves of migration, blending with older Mediterranean traditions. And Zeus is born not only from language, but from syncretism, absorbing local sacred sites, taking on ancient epithets, inheriting shrines that once belonged to older gods. In Bronze Age palace records, his name appears, not as myth, as inventory, as cult. Proof that Zeus is already being honored more than 3,000 years ago. Then the world collapses, palaces fall, writing disappears. The Dark Age comes like a long night, and in that darkness, Zeus changes. He consolidates. By the time Greece can write again, Zeus is no longer just one sky god among others. He is the king. Homer gives him politics. A ruler balancing factions, weighing destinies, holding power not just through force, but through management. Hesiod gives him legitimacy, a cosmic constitution. Zeus, the final answer to generational war. Uranus falls. Kronos devours. Zeus survives, hidden in a cave, raised in secrecy, returns as destiny with a face. He frees his siblings. He recruits monsters. He arms himself with the thunderbolt. And the universe cracks open. Titanomachy, 10 years of cosmic war. Mountains hurled like insults, thunder like an answer. The old gods fall into Tartarus, and a new hierarchy is born. Then the rebellions come, giants stacking mountains to reach the sky, an image of raw defiance, a prophecy that gods alone can't win. So Zeus needs a mortal beside him, Heracles, the bridge between human and divine. And then Typhon, chaos in the shape of a monster, a threat so vast even gods flee in some versions. Zeus, wounded, restored, returns with fury and buries the nightmare under a mountain. Order wins. Again. By now, Zeus is untouchable. So the story shifts from war to governance. Zeus becomes weather itself, rainbringer, thunderer, lightning hurler. The sky is no longer a ceiling, it is his body. Every storm becomes a theophany, divine manifestation, and then Zeus becomes family, marriages, children. A divine dynasty spreading his influence into every domain, wisdom through Athena, prophecy through Apollo, wilderness through Artemis, communication through Hermes, ecstasy through Dionysus, war through Ares, craft through Hephaestus, time through the seasons, destiny through the fates, art through the muses. Zeus doesn't rule alone. He rules through an empire of offspring. Then comes justice. Zeus as oath guardian. Zeus as protector of guests. Zeus as defender of supplicants. A moral ceiling over human society, where hospitality isn't politeness, it's sacred law, and perjury isn't lying, it's war against the sky. But the contradiction is always there. Cult Zeus is judge. Myth Zeus is scandal, a god who punishes hubris, while committing acts that look like hubris in modern eyes. And Greek culture doesn't resolve it, it lives inside it. It turns the tension into tragedy. Then comes ritual, temples, altars, sacrifice, smoke rising, meat shared, community bound under Zeus's witness. Olympia becomes the engine of unity. The Olympics not as sport, but as worship. Dodona becomes the old voice. Oak leaves and bronze chimes answering questions. Oracles become governance, a way to make destiny feel negotiable. Then philosophy arrives, and Zeus transforms again. Xenophanes scrapes myth clean. Heraclitus speaks of lightning steering all things. Plato demands the divine be good. Aristotle abstracts the highest cause. Stoics turn Zeus into logos, nature's reason, providence, fate. Zeus becomes an idea. And then Rome arrives and gives that idea armor. Zeus becomes Jupiter, not just a god, but a state symbol. The Capitoline Temple, the triumph ritual, the eagle on standards. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest, stamp of empire. And then Christianity rises and refuses the ritual. No incense, no sacrifice, no loyalty performances. The altars begin to fall silent. Temples close, festivals fade. The ancient religious machine shuts down, not with a bang, but with absence. Yet Zeus doesn't vanish. He becomes cultural afterlife, a planet named Jupiter, a thunderbolt in iconography, an eagle on empires, a template in stories, a god no one worships, but everyone recognizes. That's the map. That's the whole saga. Skyfather to Olympus, Olympus to philosophy, philosophy to empire, empire to silence, silence to memory. And now, after the recap, the real question becomes sharper than ever. If Zeus can survive in so many forms, what part of him is truly immortal? The god, or the human need that created him? So here's the moment in a long story where the audience usually relaxes. They think they've got it. Zeus is the Thunder King. Zeus is the Sky Father. Zeus is the ruler on Olympus. But that's the surface. The deeper Zeus, the one that shapes civilizations, lives in the hidden layers people don't talk about as often. Because Zeus isn't only myth. Zeus is technology. Not modern technology of machines, but technology of belief. A system designed to solve problems humans couldn't solve alone. And once you see Zeus that way, the story becomes less about an ancient god and more about how societies build authority. Let's start with the first hidden layer, Zeus as political engineering. In fragmented Greece, city-states constantly competed. Sparta, Athens, Thebes, Corinth, each convinced it deserved power, each ready to fight. So what unifies a world like that? Not a single king, not a single law code, a shared ceiling, a shared witness. Zeus becomes that ceiling. When treaties are sworn by Zeus, diplomacy gains a supernatural enforcement mechanism. You don't just betray a city, you betray the sky. When hospitality is protected by Zeus, social order becomes sacred. Strangers can move through dangerous landscapes with at least a chance of protection. Civilization becomes portable. When the Olympic truce exists under Zeus's festival, conflict pauses, not because Greeks become moral, but because the cost of defying Zeus is higher than the cost of pausing. This is religion functioning like international law. Zeus is the invisible institution above institutions. Now the second hidden layer, Zeus as weather worldview. Today we know storms are physics. But imagine living in a world where storms are personality, where thunder isn't sound waves, it's a voice, where drought isn't climate, it's punishment. That changes everything. It means nature isn't neutral. Nature is moral. And that worldview shapes behavior. If drought happens, you don't only ask, what is the cause? You ask, who is angry? If lightning strikes a place, you don't only ask, how? You ask, why there? You turn random danger into a narrative that can be negotiated. Sacrifice isn't superstition in that world. It's risk management, a community trying to stabilize reality through relationship. Zeus becomes the god who makes the atmosphere meaningful. And once the atmosphere is meaningful, priests and oracles gain power because they claim to interpret meaning. That's not a conspiracy. That's how societies organize uncertainty. Now the third hidden layer, Zeus as patriarchy made divine. This is the layer people feel emotionally even if they don't have the words. Zeus isn't just male. He's a model of male authority, the father above fathers, the king above kings. His rule is the cosmic argument that hierarchy is natural, and his mythology, especially his sexual mythology, reveals the darker side of that model, because in many myths, Zeus doesn't ask. He takes, and the world rearranges around the result. That's not just a story, It's a cultural script. Power as entitlement, entitlement as destiny. Then Hera becomes the secondary script. The fury of someone trapped inside a hierarchy she can't overthrow. She punishes downward because she can't punish upward. The myth becomes a mythic demonstration of how systems redirect violence away from the center of power and onto the vulnerable. And suddenly, Zeus isn't only ancient, he's uncomfortably modern. Because he's describing patterns humans still live inside, just without gods as characters. Now the fourth hidden layer, Zeus as propaganda. Yes, propaganda. Because Zeus's children aren't just cute myth trivia. Well, they are political tools. When a city claims its founder is a son of Zeus, that city isn't only telling a story, it's claiming legitimacy. It's saying, our bloodline comes from the sky. Our rule is divinely backed. Hero genealogies are mythic paperwork, a divine stamp on local identity. And Zeus becomes the most useful stamp because he's supreme. If you can link yourself to Zeus, you're not just important, you're cosmically authorized. So here's the re-hook question. The one that changes the whole video if you let it. Was Zeus primarily a god? Or was he a system humans built to justify and stabilize their world? Because if Zeus is a system, then his afterlife isn't surprising at all. Systems don't die easily. They mutate. They change names. They migrate into politics, philosophy, culture, symbolism. Which is why even today, people still reach for Zeus-like imagery whenever they want to describe overwhelming authority. A leader who rules from above. A state that claims destiny. A power that feels like weather. Unpredictable. Unstoppable. Beyond your control. That's Zeus energy. And now we're ready for the final stretch. The part where the story stops being only about ancient history and starts being about the human mind that invented Zeus in the first place. Because when you strip away temples and epithets, the real question remains, what do we do when we need meaning, but the sky is silent? Here's the uncomfortable secret behind Zeus. Zeus isn't just a god. He's an answer to a question so old it sits in the bones of humanity. What do we do when the world doesn't care? Because the natural world, storms, droughts, disease, death, doesn't feel fair. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't apologize. And humans have always struggled with that silence. So we do what humans do best. We turn silence into a voice. We give the sky a face. And the face we give it, again and again, across cultures, is often the same archetype, the Skyfather. Why a father? Because a father is a contradiction we already understand. A father can protect or punish. A father can provide or withhold. A father can be loving or terrifying. In other words, a father is the perfect model for the way nature feels. Rain can feed you, lightning can kill you, and neither asks permission. So the human mind reaches upward and says, if the world has power, then the power must have intention. If the power has intention, then it must have personality. If it has personality, we can negotiate. That last part is the key. Negotiation is how humans survive. Even when we can't control something, we try to build a relationship with it. That's what sacrifice is. That's what prayer is. That's what oracles are. Not primitive belief. A psychological strategy. Make the uncontrollable feel relational, because relational means possible. It means your actions might matter, and humans need that. They need their actions to matter, especially when suffering hits. Think about drought. If you believe drought is just weather, you can feel helpless. But if you believe drought is Zeus withholding rain because something is wrong, then the universe becomes morally legible. You can ask, what did we do? What must we fix? What must we offer? What must we promise? Even if the logic is mistaken scientifically, it gives you a path. It gives you agency. And agency is the difference between panic and action. Now consider justice. Humans have always feared one terrifying possibility. That wrongdoing might go unpunished. That cruelty might win. That the strong might take everything and laugh. So a Skyfather solves that fear by becoming a witness. If Zeus sees everything from above, then even if humans fail to punish perjury, Zeus can punish it. Even if a murderer escapes courts, Zeus can strike. Even if a ruler abuses power, Zeus can destroy his line. This isn't only about morality, it's about psychological survival in a world where human justice often fails. Zeus is the fantasy of moral gravity, a universe that notices, a universe that remembers, a universe where actions echo. But here's where it gets darker, because Skyfathers don't just comfort, they also justify. If Zeus is the cosmic father king, then earthly kings can claim resemblance. Hierarchy becomes natural. Male authority becomes sacred. Power becomes the way things are, not merely the way humans built society. This is where Zeus becomes more than a coping mechanism. He becomes a political tool. Because if your culture believes the universe itself is ruled by a father, then patriarchal systems can present themselves as cosmic truth, not social choice. That's why Zeus can be both protector and problem. He gives meaning and order. But he can also sanctify dominance. And the myths reveal that tension brutally. Zeus protects oaths, but breaks boundaries. Zeus punishes hubris, but acts entitled. Zeus represents justice, but his behavior often resembles the injustice people fear in rulers, which makes Zeus psychologically perfect. He matches reality, because real power is rarely pure. Real authority often claims moral purpose while taking what it wants. So Zeus becomes the divine reflection of a world where order and violence share a throne. Now, strip Zeus down to his core. And what's left? 3 human needs. 1. The need for explanation. Thunder must mean something. 2. The need for control. If we can't control the sky, maybe we can influence it. 3. The need for justice. If human systems fail, something higher must judge. Zeus is a story engine built from those needs. And that's why he survives long after belief dies, because even in a modern world, those needs don't disappear. We still ask why disasters happen. We still crave control. We still want justice to be real. We've changed the vocabulary, science, psychology, law, ethics, but the emotional hunger underneath is ancient. It's Skyfather hunger. So the question isn't only, do we still believe in Zeus? The question is, what do we replace Zeus with when the sky stops being a god, but we still need meaning? When Zeus dies as a religion, something doesn't vanish with him. A space remains. Because Zeus wasn't only a god, he was a role the human mind keeps casting. The role of the power above, unseen, vast, decisive, the force that shapes your life, whether you agree or not. And when a culture stops believing in gods, it doesn't automatically stop needing that role. It just changes the actor. So what replaces Zeus? Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. Start with the most direct modern replacement, the state. For many people today, the ultimate power isn't in the sky. It's in institutions, borders, laws, courts, armies, surveillance. You can live a moral life and still be crushed by policy. You can be innocent and still lose everything to a system. In the ancient world, that felt like Zeus. In the modern world, that can feel like bureaucracy with lightning. And notice how the state borrows divine language. Legitimacy, authority, order, security. It asks for loyalty, rituals, symbols, flags, pledges, public performances that prove you belong. That's not identical to religion, but it scratches the same psychological itch. A power above that gives structure, that punishes, that protects, that defines reality. Then there's another replacement that's even more invisible. The market. People talk about the market like a living being. The market is nervous. The market is confident. The market punishes. The market rewards. The market demands sacrifice. That language is ancient. We pretend it's purely rational, but emotionally we treat the market the way ancient people treated the sky. Unpredictable, powerful, capable of blessing or ruining you. It doesn't have a beard, but it has moods. It doesn't throw thunderbolts, but it can erase your livelihood overnight. And just like Zeus, the market is often framed as moral when it's really power. If you fail, you deserved it. If you win, you were favored. That's Zeus logic, reborn as economics. Now step into the newest replacement, the algorithm. The invisible system that decides what you see, what you're shown, what you're encouraged to want. It doesn't feel like a god at first, but it has the godlike traits. It's unseen. It's everywhere. It shapes behavior. It rewards some and buries others. It's hard to predict, and most people don't truly understand how it works. Sound familiar? That's the old relationship with Zeus, rewritten in code. Where ancient people watched storms and tried to interpret signs, modern people watch metrics and try to interpret the feed. Why did this video die? Why did that post explode? What did the algorithm want? It's divination, just with numbers. And people make offerings too. Time, attention, content. They sacrifice hours, sleep, sanity, hoping the invisible system will bless them with reach. Now add a deeper replacement, ideology. A belief system that explains everything. That tells you who's good, who's evil, why suffering happens, what history means. Ideology can become a Skyfather because it gives moral order to chaos. It tells you, the universe is not random. There is a structure. That's what Zeus did for Greeks. And ideology can become just as demanding, just as punishing, just as absolute. If Zeus was a cosmic king, ideology can become a cosmic law. Then, of course, there's the one replacement humans never abandon. Fate. Even in a secular world, people still talk like fate exists. It was meant to happen. It wasn't meant to be. It's written. That's Moira language. That's Zeus and the fates' tension coming back through our mouths even when we don't believe in Greek gods. Because the human mind hates randomness. It keeps trying to turn the chaos into a script. So here's the twist. Zeus didn't vanish. He migrated. He moved from Olympus into systems, from thunder into institutions, from altar smoke into economic logic, from oracles into algorithms, from divine law into ideologies. And that migration tells you something crucial. The need for Zeus is not about ancient superstition. It's about the human desire to locate power somewhere, so we can either worship it, fear it, or blame it. Because blaming the sky is easier than admitting the world is sometimes meaningless. And worshiping the sky is easier than admitting the strong can win without being right. So what does Zeus's story teach us now? Maybe not to find a new Skyfather, but to recognize when we've already built one. To notice when we treat a system like a god. Unquestionable, inevitable, beyond human responsibility. Because once a system becomes divine, it becomes harder to change. And if Zeus's legacy is anything, it's this. Humans will always create a throne above themselves, unless they decide to take responsibility for the world without needing a god to guarantee it. In your life, what feels most like Zeus today? Government, money, algorithms, fate, or something else? And do you think replacing gods with systems makes us freer, or just gives us new invisible rulers?